Hey guys, welcome into a podcast that is completely unnamed, where we're going to talk about Diablo 4 leading into Season 2. And similar to the sit-down podcast on this channel, we're basically just going to have a conversation with some buddies. We're all gamers, having a good time, and we'll see where the conversation leads. Main topics is basically going to be covering the dev streams and the patch notes and leading into Season 2, what we're planning to play. Outside of that, we'll just have a good time and talk, and you guys can tune in to watch it, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. With us, we got DarthMicrotransaction, wudijo, and Rax. Welcome in, all three of you guys. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, to make it easier for us to start off a non-named podcast without any topics, I'm just going to go ahead with one of the things we're going to talk about, and that's our thoughts on the dev stream. So, we'll just kick that off and throw the ball over to Woody. What's your thoughts on the dev streams we've seen so far?
The dev streams. I mean, I think that in general, they have been doing a pretty good job with the patch. I think that most of the changes they are doing are really good. They're introducing lots of new fun items to play around with, and ways to build your character and start scaling in different ways. I think that the game is definitely moving in the right direction, and they have been doing a pretty good job at presenting it. Outside of the meme video that we saw the other day. But I guess that's a separate topic for later. But in any case, yeah, I mean, I'm very positive towards Season 2, and I hear from a lot of people that they think the same. So I think it's going to be fun. And just like theory crafting, the last few days, I've been doing a lot of stuff, and I'm very excited to try a bunch of different builds in Season 2.
Yeah, I'm definitely in a similar boat as you. the meme video, I actually only saw it first through your video, Rax.
Yeah.
I thought that was going to get like 10K views, and then I look at it, it's almost like 250,000, and the whole video, I'm just laughing the whole time. I'm like,
yep.
Wow,
it's contagious, I can tell you that. Holy shit. But that seems to be like name of the game with a lot of changes in the past, at least. Hopefully, with the things we've seen so far, they're taking a step in what I would refer to as the right direction. But it seems like a lot of it is just random numbers thrown in. Yeah, this is fine. Math doesn't even check out.
Yeah. And some people may not know, but Blizzard actually commented on it, and they said,
Really?
our social team posted a video that is like a complete meme. It's like meme worthy. And they're like, I have no idea how that went through, but thanks for bringing it to our attention because we took it down. So they apparently internally, they got a laugh out of it. And I guess they're not really sure how the people I talked to, they're not sure how it got posted, but they were having a laugh about it too. So
wait, so it was supposed to be a meme? And
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was supposed to be, but when they saw the video, when they saw the reaction, they themselves called it a meme because they're like, that video was terrible. Like, no idea
Okay.
how did that get posted? They don't know, so that's why they took it down. So they thought it was funny as well that such a video got posted.
Yeah, I mean, what can you do?
Right
You get
now,
caught
I'm gonna
right
try
at it.
to fix. 1 second. My OBS is dying. I'm not sure what's going on.
All right, well, we can still hear you at least. I mean, it's like, what are you gonna do when you get caught right at it like that? It's like, there's no point in going out and apologizing. You might as well just laugh about it because everyone else did.
40% of 1,000 is 40. Got it.
Oh man, that was hilarious. What was your thoughts on the dev streams? You're taking your Rax since we talk about the video as well.
So what I keep thinking, like, there's no point in actually thinking about this, but I think about it anyway. It's like woulda, shoulda, coulda. But if Diablo 4 would have released like with the stuff that they have in Season 2, with maybe like a loot filter and maybe a little bit more of an end game, I think Diablo 2, or did I say Diablo 2? Diablo 4. Diablo 4's reception would have been so much better. It's like, it's just such a missed opportunity that they only needed to wait, another half year of development, and the whole story would have been turned instead of them just like, trying to recover and bring people back. I think they did a good job as far as bringing a lot of the core features that the game needs. I'm expecting us to have fun with the Uber bosses for maybe a week. I think we're going to delete them instantly. I mean, how fun is it going to be after you've killed Duriel 5 times? probably not going to be all that much fun anymore. And then we're going to be kind of in the same boat, which is why I'm happy. At the end of one of the dev streams, Joe Shelley said the main thing that they're working on, and we'll be looking at season 3, we'll be looking at BlizzCon, is endgame content. That's definitely the thing that's lacking again. So if we get some more endgame content on top of this, and we get the loot filters, we should be rolling here. But it was a good start. It's just too bad, man. We needed this at the start. If the game would have launched like this, I think people's scores of the game would be way higher.
I definitely think that that's a fairly fair take as well. Like you mentioned, I don't think like the current iteration of new endgame content we're going to see is going to be enough for the blaster gamers, simply because of the fact that they said, well, you're going to be gated behind, farming the fragments to get engaged to engage with fights like Turiel. So therefore, the fight's going to be easier than Uber Lilith, which is already doable around level 80 or something. So it's like kind of so, but at least it gives us something. And what I like the most is something other games like Last Epoch, which I know you guys have been playing, has been doubling down on, and that's like target farming, allowing you to be able to chase down a specific item. It can drop anywhere, but you have a higher chance if you do that. It's like an increased chance to drop in the exact item that you want. And that's something I'm a big fan of when it comes to grinding out ARPG games. So if I want that specific unique, I can just go and do that fight. Like I'm going to do Ring of Mendel. I think that's Beast in the Ice. So that's something I'll be farming a lot. And that feels good because I'm incentivized to engage with that mechanic. And it's not just, hey, I'm doing this, maybe I'll drop something good. It's I can literally target farm me, hey, I want that specific item. I can do that. And that makes my time invested not feel like it's being wasted. That's like where I'm sitting. What's your take on it, DM?
To be honest, I woke up today feeling fairly positive about this stuff. I was kind of looking through the class balance changes last night, digging through some more of the patch notes. And while I feel the same way about kind of feeling like there's not much in-game in the game, the stuff that they are adding, I like. So I don't know. I kind of have a positive take. I feel like the class balance changes all look fairly exciting. Maybe Rogue hasn't been changed as much as some of the other ones, but like looking at the stuff like Necromancer, Druid, I like the changes here. They look exciting. Necromancer's got like 3 builds I want to try this season. I thought Blood looks fun. I thought the Shadow Dot thing looks pretty good. I thought Minions look fun. There's Thorns, which I'm sure is going to be dog shit, but like still Thorns Minion, I still want to try it, So I think I'm going to be able to carve some fun out of this season. Vampiric powers I was poking through, they look kind of fun. So like there's probably a lot more I want out of the game, but today I feel optimistic. I'm looking at it, it's like I'm going to have some fun with this season for a little while, and probably not going to last me 3 months, but it's going to last me a little bit of time. I'm going to have a good time.
No, I definitely feel optimistic. The only thing that I'm concerned about is a guy in chat a couple of weeks ago, or like last week or something. He countered my statement when I said they're taking a step in the right direction. He said, how much is the step in the right direction worth when they've taken a hike 7,000 miles down the wrong road? So the question is, for me, is like, is it going to be enough leading into it? But I'm in the same boat. Like I'm a bit optimistic. I feel like, okay, well, they're taking the steps required. Like Rax was saying, I mean, having the game released, the initial game launch to be in the state that we're getting now in season 2 would have been optimal. But I mean, we can always live in the past, right? That applies to many games. Maybe D4 more than others, obviously, but still, I think that the idea of them taking a step in the right direction is obviously very, very exciting. But you said, Rex, that they're focusing on the D4 announcement or something like that on BlizzCon towards Endgame. I didn't catch that in detail.
Well, I don't know if they're going to do an announcement for the Endgame on BlizzCon, but at the end of one of the dev streams, one of like the fan questions, or one of the questions from the stream was, what are you guys working on next? And Joe Shelley, the game producer, said the Endgame. So I'm expecting them to maybe announce season 3. And if they're going to announce season 3, we know season 3 has leaderboards, and we know they're working on the Endgame. So that's what I would expect. They didn't like announce that there would be stuff there, but I'm just trying to put 2 and 2 together. Could be wrong. Another thing that I'm expecting, they kind of secretly alluded to this in one of their messages. Someone asked a question that said, the vampiric powers are all in armor and the malignant stuff is all in jewelry. Why are you guys developing stuff that isn't like in the game? Are you guys going to like combine it and add it in? And they said, their response was BlizzCon. So might be alluding to the fact that maybe the vampiric powers and the malignant powers are going to be fused into the game, which if it's just like a direct copy into the game, I'm actually not sure that that's going to be great. Maybe it will be, or maybe they're making some changes, but that's pretty much all that I know.
Like something Path of Exile has an issue with is content bloat. Now, what PoE does really good compared to many of the RPGs is the whole idea that the genre is literally the definition of insanity. Like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting to drop that be unique or mirror in PoE or whatever for LP item in LC epoch. So it's like the good thing with PoE is that they have this phenomenal aspect or approach to the game that allows you to engage with mechanics that literally distracts you from the fact that you're doing the same thing over and over again. And a lot of that is credited to the different league mechanics that has then been woven in to become core mechanics of the game. And in Diablo, we had the season of the Malignant Hearts, the season 1, and then that's all just taken away. And that content and that opportunity to fuse that one way or another into the core game was never taken. And then season 2 comes around, we get vampiric powers. And to my understanding, we're not going to have that later. Whereas the opportunities to start adding these things could be a preferable approach to actual endgame. But we are getting some of it right, because Varshan is becoming the boss in season 2, right? And that's one of the things where they're introducing or reusing assets, because that's also one thing to keep in mind. All these investments is dev time and money invested to do these extra content approaches. I just find it kind of awkward that opportunity isn't taken earlier in the development to make sure that we get that, because that would also feature into not just specifically endgame, but longevity of the game, and the retention should be higher if there are more things people can engage with, which I do think season 2 has taken a good step in that direction with adding the incentivizing changes to engage with the whispers, engage with the other mechanics, to then gather the fragments to engage with another mechanic. I think that's a very effective way to create that scenario. Woody, you back entirely now? You good?
Yeah, it's all good now.
All
And I
good.
just want to talk to that point as well, if I
Yeah,
may.
go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, I wholeheartedly agree that this is kind of like the way that ARPGs go these days, right? I guess PoE in particular has shown that you build on the base game, more and more and more, up to a point at least, that's healthy. And then, at very least, like starting out with Diablo 4, especially, everyone knowing that there is, like lack of content and lack of endgame and stuff like that, this is definitely what they need to do for like a few seasons in a row at the very minimum, right? And then they can like still, at the later point, they can still decide, okay, are we going to keep around all these things, or are we going to like, phase something out again and, reduce the bloat a bit or something like that. But, right now there's like nothing to worry about with bloat, right?
Yeah.
I guess the one thing to worry about is kind of like that they just can like stack progression systems or stack like power creep on top of each other, right? So if you keep the hearts in the game and then you add the vampiric powers and then you add season 3 and then you add season 4, and you're gonna have like like this insane progression that very quickly leads us back to Diablo 3. And I think that's also something that they want to and definitely should avoid in my book. So that's also like another thing. And there's no harm in like bringing back maybe some of those hearts as like a new unique item or as a new legendary, if they kind of work, or even like the stronger hearts, like imagine the barber comes back as like a 5-piece set or something, and this is the only effect or something like that. There could be crazy ideas around these things, and this is probably also what they could do without completely scrapping what they made already.
Yeah, I think you make a pretty fundamental point there, which is that I feel if we use the comparison to Path of Exile of taking the seasons they develop and like rolling them into the game, I think you hit it right on the head, where it's in Diablo 4, the seasons increase like the ceiling of power. So you're getting new mechanics to make your character stronger. Whereas in Path of Exile, we're creating more mini games in which people can do to acquire the power that's already in the game. So it's like one is creating a cyclable, farmable content to build your character. The other one is increasing the potential of what your character can become. So if we're going to take all of these previous seasons, stack them on top of each other, I think you're 100% correct. We're going to end up with Diablo 3 billions and billions and trillions of damage before you know it. while still doing that stuff in the same content we already have, because we're not really making too much more in-game content, to Rax's point. So the Eternal Realm's going to end up being you're strong as fuck, boys, and there's barely any content because we made ways to get stronger, not ways to do more things to acquire the power, and then you're one-shotting all the content there already is in the game anyway, and it actually becomes more boring over time is the way I would see that playing out. So
Yeah, I definitely see that being a problem. Is like I mentioned, PoE, for example, has that problem with the content bloat, where it's just too much. It makes it very daunting for a newer player to get into. Whereas D4 is very easy to get into. The game is extremely enjoyable till you reach the end game, and that's where you start noticing like there's a lack of content around here. But I definitely think that someone in chat mentioned the way Hearthstone is operating with the previous content cycles that they've had, where they have every quarter they introduce something they've had in the past. And I mean, they're definitely different options or suggestions that they could do in either a half-ass fused way, where they take parts of it, like you were saying, Woody, with set item, you get the barber effect if you have 4 of these specific items, or say that you have to use a legendary aspect on a piece. It might require 2 of them, so you have to put 2 of these aspects to make sure that effects is in place or something like that. That would be a cool way to allow for more build diversity and another way of getting power without that being too much. Allows for balancing. But then they don't have to have that in every season. It just be
Yeah, I think
optional
the
things.
main point is that if you make a new item that has an old effect from a heart, for example, it comes at a cost, right? The hearts were just extra, and now the hearts are gone, but you can make a new item that has an effect of a heart, and that gives you like another way to make a character, make a build. I'm very surprised that they didn't actually introduce the automatic like curse stuff or the automatic corpse stuff for Necros again, for example. But maybe that will come later, right? So it just gives you like maybe a heavy cost of you have to like sacrifice your your weapon slot, and you have that effect or something, right? And you can make something out of that instead of having just free power creep. And I mean, it's like one thing to introduce like fun season mechanics to give you power creep, but I think realistically they should focus much more on the content side, and they are slightly doing that already, right? They keep Varshan around as a new boss. They're going to keep the Lord Zir around as a new boss. That's already decided, right? There's like the season 2 boss, and he's going to stay in the game, so that's already decided. And who knows, maybe you're going to keep some of these vampire events around as like a new dungeon event that can pop up or something, at least. It would be something. And maybe actually going to get some kind of permanent progression system out of that as well.
No, absolutely. And then we were getting ladders next season, was it? Or later? Does anyone know?
yeah, season 3, I think they said leaderboards, right?
Leaderboards are season 3.
Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely things that we've been waiting for. I mean, take a look at like the season 0, the game launch, where they they wasted everyone's time by spending several hours on talking about how incredible the calculation of armor is to mitigate elemental damage take. The whole graph and everything. Spent several hours on that, and then they realized, this sucks. This is really bad. Maybe they had the same guys do the calculation for that as they did for the video we saw the other day.
And I think they didn't actually change the armor calculation itself, though, right? Like it's still the same like graph basically with the same values as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
So it's just that it's just like resistances are separate now. So that's the only thing.
Yeah, I don't know if the actual formula changed other than removing resistances, but the magnitude of the amount of armor you can get is higher.
Yes. Yeah, I think they expected to like cap your resistances first and then also cap your armor. I think this is just kind of like the new baseline of builds now. Where previously it was just like try to stack armor as much as you can and hope you survive kind of thing. So I believe it's gonna feel very different now with different builds, with like how it was before basically, because suddenly you have so much more access to armor, you have so much more, like they have to resist now that are kind of like streamlined for every build suddenly. So it's gonna feel very different, I think, going into season 2. Just playing these different builds where I previously had these different armor values, etc.
What do you guys think the odds are that we become insanely tanky in this season with the resistance changes? and the armor
they're
changes
extremely
before
high.
the fight changes. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm wondering. I'm looking at the for the fight changes, more max HP on things. We have resistances now that the maximums seem like they can go pretty high. Potions, new armor. It's starting to seem to me like this might be the season of the Tank Boys. No more game one shot off screen.
Fair.
Well, lucky for us, they just introduced like 7 new armor unique pieces, so you can throw all of those on, and you don't need any defense.
I mean, it's something that a lot of people seem to be missing as well is the certain modifiers are directly associated either through thresholds of spans of rolls, which I know Maxwell has dug out through, for example, Ring of Mendel, the trigger effect. That's gated or associated directly with item power. And if that's correct, then we can reach a size like 27,000 on the Ring of Mendel damage-wise. But there are other modifiers outside of just the generic damage in weapons or the armor on gear pieces that's going to be associated with the item power. We also have life modifiers, which is directly connected to the item power of the item. So the numerical value span that you can roll is based on that. So all of these things will allow us to definitely become way tankier than before. But another thing was the mention of the graph, the calculation on the graph for the armor remains the same. And we know that that graph is kicking in diminishing returns on the higher end levels. So the more armor you get, you're going to be kind of panning out. I think it was, 80% or something like that, or might be lower. But that also means that with a vastly increase of armor gain through our generic base gear pieces, and obviously with the buff to disobedience allowing us to scale it even further, that will put us in a position where we might actually have to calculate the idea of running fewer increased armor modifiers on our gear, which also increases diversity on gearing when it comes to which modifiers you want to collect. And maybe instead of an armor modifier, you'll now pick up a resistance modifier, or if you're good on that, you'll get an offensive modifier on quite a few pieces. Because in the past, we had like pants and chests were like one of the biggest pieces for defensive scaling. We had stacked a bunch of DR modifiers, armor, life. Those like had those pieces on there. And same thing with helmets to some degree as well. And that might be changed quite a lot because of the calculation and the increased base armor to now provide us with the opportunity to get a rest roll without that hurting us. Because a lot of people that I've been talking to have referred to it being annoying that we now have to sacrifice offensive modifiers to get resistances. And I don't think that's the case because of the armor scaling that we get on our base gear and the disobedience. Would you guys agree on that?
They get resistances or they get armor?
No, replacing armor providing modifiers on our gear to get rest instead, since the base armor goes up and disobedience is scaling higher as well.
Yeah, so I would say that you're not going to be sacrificing power for a few reasons. First of all, the way that Blizzard has kind of designed just how you apply legendaries to gear, there's slots for offensive stuff and slots for defensive stuff, and there's barely any overlap there. The other reason is before, armor did everything for you. Armor is your physical damage mitigation and a lot of your elemental damage. Let's say you're playing a sorcerer against Uber Lilith. I mean, and against future Uber bosses, how much physical damage are you going to take? Are you going to go up and face tank Lilith? If these Uber, but like if Duriel is all poison and you can just teleport away from him infinitely, you might not even need armor as a sorcerer to fight Duriel. You will probably need it as maybe a druid or a rogue or a barb, but some classes might be able to get out of these fights with very poor armor values because they just cap their resistances. They cap their max resistances, which we all know is insanely powerful because it's like, mitigating you already mitigate 70% of it. When you get an extra 10, you're taking away 10 out of 30, which is mega DR. If anything, I think it might go the other way, just giving you more options on how to gear and being able to specifically cap certain, resistances to certain types of damage allows probably certain builds to avoid certain damage mitigators entirely.
Yeah, I definitely see that as well. I mean, like you mentioned also being able to, teleport away from damage and whatnot. Something that people refer to as like a quality of life clear speed modifier, such as movement speed, is often more often than not in most ARPGs also considered a very highly effective defensive modifier to be able to get out of harm's way, get out of an explosion or death pulses and whatnot, but also poison pool, for example, allowing movement speed to be considered a very effective defensive layer as well. And I mean, every class has a very effective stacking of this, except for the Necromancer. And I'm gonna go ahead and take Adam Jackson's trademarked theme of hand balancing. So these are the hand balancing. You got the approach of a sweet spot right here, and they even said that Necromancer mobility is below this threshold, right? And then but they want things to be in this sweet spot. And then you have things that are above the threshold, but they want to bring those down, and they want to bring the things up to the sweet spot, right? That's kind of what they were talking about. But they even acknowledged in the dev stream that Necromancer mobility is way down here. And then they just moved on to the next topic. It's completely ignoring that they just said that it's bad. And then they did nothing. No statement, nothing to say to fix that problem. Would you guys say when it comes to the Necromancer mobility that is a fundamental problem? Because Necromancer have been a high-performing class in the game already.
Well, I would say that he actually did give the explanation that they said that they want certain classes to excel at certain things and have weaknesses in other things. And in that case, for Necromancers, the mobility is their weakness. And, well, they're just generally a really strong class with a bunch of their builds. Like, actually, for Season 2, I would believe that Necromancer probably has the strongest non-bugged build in the game, depending on how Xephal's ring works, the new unique ring.
Yep.
But yeah, at the very least, Necromancers are in a really good spot, despite their low mobility, I think. So I think it's kind of fine. And actually, having played Necro in Season 1, I had exactly the same impression as well. I was really surprised by how easy the game felt playing a Necromancer. And I didn't even feel that so. I was expecting that I would absolutely hate playing a Necromancer after having played Rogue and maining Rogue and, jumping around 7 times per second. But then I played a Necromancer, and I was actually totally fine because I was just destroying everything. And that also gave me this clear speed back that I was kind of like thinking I would lack previously, because I was just so much stronger. It was so easy to go higher tiers and everything. So I think it's fine that classes have like a bit of their own specialties, and Necro being like a bit stronger, like in throughput but lower in mobility. I think that's okay. It's not like they're like worlds apart. You can still stack movement speed on your amulet, on your boots. You can have movement speed on evade. You can have darkness skills that have extra speed, and I'm sure that over time they might even add more stuff, right? Or it can even go like double mobility aspects on if you want on a Necro. So there are ways to also make it more rogue like, basically, if you really want. So I don't think it's such a big problem.
I usually refer to, I think you get the Exploding Shadow Mist or Infinimist builds, or you get the Bone Spear. Like, something I usually call, refer to or explain the Necromancer is that the Necromancer class is like a, really, really old rusty wheelchair, right? And then you add, double movement speed modifiers on your boots and your amulet, and then, suddenly you got a fancy new model of their wheelchair. And then you add things like, you kill an elite, you get extra movement speed. You stack that on both amulet and boots. Suddenly you sacrifice extra modifiers for this. But that basically turns that new fancy model of a wheelchair into one with spinning rims and a little, electrical motor to help you with the uphill battles. And suddenly you're able to be, at the speed of the other classes. But it does come at a investment cost of these modifiers on your gear pieces. But I definitely agree with the whole balancing. There need to be weaknesses and strengths on the classes. I'm a big fan of the Necromancer myself. I mean, it's basically what I'm maining. I'm with the Necromancer like you are for the rogues, basically. But that said, I'm assuming you're going to play a rogue on Season 2 launch?
Yes, I will. I'm going to start as a rogue, yes.
Any
I'm quite
specific
excited to play some rogue again. I'm probably going to play Death Trap, so it's just looking like a really nice racing build again. After the race, though, I'm really excited for Rain of Arrows. I want to definitely make a full, fresh start with Rain of Arrows. That's going to be really fun, I think.
All right. What about you, DM? You talked about Thorn's minions. You're actually going to start that?
I legitimately want to try it. I don't care if it's a troll build. I'm actually like, I actually just want to see. I want to see it as Darth Vader would say, with my own eyes. Like, I just want to know exactly what it does. So I'm probably going to do Thorn minions, and when it's absolute dog of this earth, then I'll switch over to Blood. But I'm thinking that's where I'm going to go. It's that, or I'm going to go back to Bear. I'm really going back and forth between Necromancer and Druid, because They both sound fun. I was thought Sorcerer would be kind of fun. You know, they have intelligence and resistances work now, so maybe it'd be kind of fun too. But I keep coming back to Necromancer just because there's like 3 builds I want to play, and all the other classes there's like 1 build I want to try. But Necromancer has multiple builds that I actually really want to play. So yeah, it's probably gonna be Necro for me, my dude.
That's fair. That's fair. I do believe Rod Ferguson was starting season 0, right, with Thorns minions. So I mean, at least you got the devs on your side.
There we go. Rod's a god tier gamer, I'm sure. So it'll be great.
Just looking at Rax laughing. What are you starting, Rax?
Well, up until I would like to play Rogue. I think Rogue is gonna fly, but I can't. I had to resign in the middle of the race last time. My right hand doesn't work. I can't play Rogue. It's just too much APM. It's gonna break my hand. So I was between Necro and Sorcerer. I tried them both, and I think Necro just presses way less buttons. So I think I'm gonna start Necro just to try to finish the race this time.
Fair enough. Any specific build in mind?
I'm gonna go Blood Surge, and then I've tried the capstone with Blood Surge. That is one of the saddest experiences you could ever have in Diablo 4. I don't recommend that. I threw some blood lances in the capstone. I don't recommend that. I mean, I was ready to jump off a cliff. So we need to get NASA and all the scientists in here about a build that can actually kill these monsters in the capstone. I hope they get like a 99% nerf on their health, because otherwise I think I'm going to have to do the 50 capstone at like level 99 as a Necromancer. No, I mean, I'm being dramatic, but no, I did do the capstone at Blood Surge, and I think every Blood Surge hit the monsters for 4% of their health. So got to come up with something. It's an abomination.
Well, the funny part is the capstone dungeon is the easy part. Then you have to go into Nightmare. How about that?
I got no problem with that. I can run to the dopamine tunnels and press 1 button. They'll die. They got no problem there. But
You just want to do dopamine tunnels all day long.
Killing the first animus carrier to get my first 3 orbs to start the thing is 9 potions, like 20 consumables and kiting, and it's real bad.
Oh, now blood is really nice up till you start getting to the initial in-game content, the introduction to it with the capstones, and at that point it kind of requires either power and or gear. Mostly it's just the life stacking for the overpower, but that was like in the previous version, so we can revert back to the patch notes parts of it. They are finally, I guess finally, a lot of things are happening right now, but they are making quite significant changes to the way overpower and the blood skills will work, but overpower damage will be calculated, because it's been so awkward with tons of damage modifier. It doesn't even scale overpower. Like, you could have a generic 5% increased damage from your Paragon board that did not affect your overpower damage. So there's so many things that basically did nothing for the overpower whatsoever, which is really awkward. And it just made it so bad. But those things are changing, so I couldn't tell by the numbers we saw in the patch notes information. I couldn't pinpoint where on a tier list the blood bills would land until I actually playtested it. But did you guys have a similar experience with that?
I think it had like a very wonky old calculation, right, where it just gave you like this damage value and added it, which made it feel like great in the early game and terrible in the end game. I don't exactly know how they balanced it throughout the whole game. I was actually wondering to myself, I was like, well, when you start the game, you don't have very high life, and we don't have that like flat damage anymore. I actually wondered if it's possible that overpower feels worse in the beginning. But I think no matter what, it's going to be really, really good in the end game. I would expect it to make a big difference, because in the design of some of the classes, like Druid comes to mind, Blood, Necro, to some degree Barbarian, they gave you a lot of ways to try to overpower, but it was never viable. So now stacking Fortify, Life, Overpower, the math seems much better now. I'm expecting those builds to get a pretty significant boost in the end game.
I'm also kind of curious how the vampiric powers are going to finagle their way into all of this, because there's been a lot of discussion around like the balance of the class balance changes, etc. But how are you guys thinking the vampire powers are really going to go into this? Because I saw there's the cursing ones, there's the minion ones, there's like an overpower one, etc. I'm having a hard time figuring out what's the goaded power? Like we had Barber for stupid cat. We had Barber for season 1 Caged Heart. But what do you think is the absolute goat for the vampire powers for season 2? Do you have one that comes to your mind?
Ravenous.
Actually, not in my opinion. I think they have done a much better job at balancing the powers compared to season 1.
Yeah.
Season 1, there were like some that were clearly useless, just reading them, and then there was Barber. So,
Yeah.
and then they buffed Barber on top of that. Yeah, so that was very strange, but this happened apparently. And in season 2, like looking at the builds and like theory crafting build, I felt like there's definitely room for almost every single power. Just like looking at them, I think so. Okay, some are definitely like a bit streamlined. Like a bit more like, okay, this one is only for companions, so you can only do that. But everything has its place a little bit, so I think that's just kind of nice. And there's still some mix and match you can do with various powers, with major and minor, and there's like a bit of a combo you can do in some cases. So I kind of like that, and it definitely leaves a lot of room for creativity, and I think that's really important to give people something new to figure out, something to experiment, and it's basically like you have 5 extra legendary aspects now from a separate pool, and you just gotta like try to fit that in your build somehow that you're already playing, and I think that's really nice.
I kind of agree. I mean, obviously, Barber was, it was up there, it was kind of ridiculous. What I did like with the hearts, if you want to compare them, was the quality of life additions. For Necro, for example, we always have the issue when you run minions. Like, I'll be starting up with Ring of Mendel myself. I think that's one of the craziest builds out there, and especially with the changes. And one of the problems that build has compared to, well, together with most Necromancer builds, is that you have to have the minion on your action bar. You're limited in the amount of actions you can have. And you also have the necessity on 99% of the builds that uses a curse. Suddenly, if I choose to run 1 minion, that's 2 of my action bars already locked down in place that I cannot change. And what the hearts provided was the Decrepit aura, allowed me to not have the Decrepify on my action bar. Most of the biggest reason for that was just for the CDR stacking, not so much for the damage reduction. So to be able to automate that allowed us to have more variety in the way we design the builds, and that allows us to have more builds in general. Because I mean, you got to keep in mind that we were looking at a game where the classes are designed with a skill twig, and that's the point so you can put in your skill points, and then you're just ending up with a very limited section of diversity for each class. And that becomes even harder when you're then limited on the amount of action bars you can, or action skills you can have in your bar. So the Malignant Heart fixed that to a large degree, whereas the Vampiric Powers doesn't seem to bring any of that type of quality of life addition, which would increase build diversity. But I also agree that they're definitely more balanced. I think that the Ravenous one is the one that sticks out the most. It's the one that gets you on lucky hits 20% chance, or up to 20% chance, to increase your attack speed by 40% of your total movement speed, not your increased movement speed. And, you stack that up, and, you have the generic movement speed and your modifiers and whatever modifier scaling you have for it. 40% of that movement speed, that's a lot of attack speed from a Vampiric power on the side. Like, you're going to be shooting blood lances like never before, or bone spear if you're sustaining it. It's going to be pretty crazy. And I believe there's, that benefits builds that are generically faster. I mean, rogues should be benefiting quite a lot from this as well, right?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people overvalue how good Ravenous really is. There's 2 problems, I think. Number 1 is you actually have to trigger it, and 20% lucky hit is not necessarily so easy to accomplish for many builds if you don't hit many targets with like a big AoE attack or so. So it's going to be somewhat inconsistent. And the other thing is that you also have to somehow generate all the resource. I mean, there are builds that don't care about resource, but many builds do actually. And one of the main problems that you're trying to solve when you make a build is figuring out your resources. So when you suddenly have like nearly double attack speed or something like that, that's definitely going to be a bigger struggle. And I think a lot of people are underestimating how big of a problem that will be. And in the case of rogues, you can say, okay, you have combo points. But when you play combo points, you usually have a kind of a rhythm, right? You have muscle memory. How long do you need to press your generator? How long do you, and then you press your core skill and repeat. And in that case, when you have like this insane jump in attack speed and you don't notice, then you might desync your cycle, or actually gonna miss opportunity. So it's gonna be a much bigger struggle to make it work than I think most people realize. that being said, it is a pretty good power, and for some builds it will be absolutely ridiculous.
Maybe it's
Yeah, I thought.
go ahead.
I was just gonna add to that. I thought for Ravenous was gonna be really good for like generator builds. Not that generator builds are like top tier right now anyway, but I was thinking like
True.
Arclash Sorcerer or maybe one day the Frenzy Barb. Like, hey, if you stack as much attack speed as you possibly can with Frenzy, there's also a power where every time you cast a skill, you get 3% of your life back. I mean, unless you one-shot a Frenzy Barb, they're going to go right back to 100% health if it's literally every swing, right? If there's no ICD on it. I mean, Frenzy Barb might just stand there and just chop Uber Duriel, which would be the most beautiful thing to see if that actually works.
Oh, for sure. I think that I'm very hard locked in when I'm looking at the powers and changes on the Necromancer specifically, because like the way we played Bone Spear was to make sure that you sustain it on a boss fight, right? You position yourself so that with the splintering, so you hit 6 times per cast. That's how you were sustaining the Bone Spear with the high end gear, of course. And Bone Spear has like a 50% lucky hit, and if you do 50% without even having any lucky hit modifiers, that's suddenly 3 lucky hits averagely per cast, which is with a 20% Ravenous, that's 0.6. That's 60% of per cast for you to trigger it. And then if you're sustaining it, you get all that attack speed and you'll just shoot faster as you're sustaining it. But that's for that build specifically. But I definitely see your point on other builds and other classes having those problems. I didn't think about the Frenzy Bar. That actually would be really cool to see, like the super tank that doesn't necessarily scale poison rest and whatnot to mitigate the damage, but rather to just sustain it. But what's your take, DM, on sorry?
I was just gonna add, I think you do both. You take max poison resist, what you get the 85, you take it, and then you say, all right, Duriel, get 3% of my life back per hit, and I attack at the speed of light. And you get your armor cap on the graph that we talked about before with the increased armor. Try to kill me. Just, I'm just gonna stand here. I'll dodge your one-shot mechanics and just try to kill me. I don't know if you can. I'm gonna try it.
Ghazzy, you mentioned Bone Spear, and I'm curious. They've nerfed Bone Spear again. Do you think it's still going to be a pretty top tier build? Because it kind of seems like they're trying to make blood like the new thing, and then they're nerfing Bone Spear yet again. But then the last time they buffed the generators by Necromancer. Speaking of generators, so we're kind of off the back of a buff for the generation portion of it. But it looks like damage got nerfed again. What's your take on Bone Spear?
I think that the top tier build for minion or for necromancers going into season 2 is going to be Ring of Mendel, but because of the changes to Bone Prison, you need to have a realistic, effective way to generate lucky hits, which means Bone Spear because of how it works with splintering. So I think Bone Spear will become the top build will be a hybrid of Ring of Mendel, but you're using Bone Spear for the triggers. You're hitting a pack of enemies, you're going to trigger it. That's pretty much guaranteed. On a single target boss fight, you're stacking lucky hits. You're going to have about 85% lucky hit on that. I mean, you're going to trigger... I had an unoptimized character in the Eternal Realm, and we calculated that the Ring of Mendel would, on a single target boss fight, trigger every 2.2 or 2.3 casts. And with proper attack speed, you're sitting and doing that. You're triggering a Mendel every less than 2 seconds, 1.5, 2 seconds, and you get stupid amounts of damage in these things. And as the nerfs are kicking in, we also can't forget that outside of the armor modifiers and the Ring of Mendel modifier and life modifier scaling with being associated with item power, so is the weapon damage, right? And there's a big difference from 825 and 925. So we're going to get a tremendous amount of power in terms of damage output from that alone, which is obviously going to counter or work against the nerf itself as well. And the other part is the way Wind Striker and the movement speed modifiers that you have in killing elites would very likely put the Bone Spear build into the category of one of the faster clearing, Nightmare Dungeon clearing builds, simply because of how the skill works. You clear off with the splash of the charge clearing AoE, and you're able to do that with the increased powers. And you don't necessarily need to do billions of damage on your hits to clear high tier Nightmare Dungeons to make that an effective build. So I'm not sure if it's going to change that much in terms of where on the tier list that Bone Spear builds, a pure Bone Spear build that is, would land because of the inherent mechanical functions of it. But it's like I mentioned before, without playtesting it, it's very hard to pinpoint where blood builds will land, but it definitely feels like they're putting as the blood builds in a better position, especially for endgame, like you mentioned, Rex. But where it lands in the tier list is so hard to pinpoint because of all of the things are theoretical and just manually calculated because of the limitations of playtesting that we have and desire to do so before this change makes it very hard to put in place, right? So maybe blood bills will be better and the bone spear and ring of metal will be behind. It's impossible to tell, but my initial thoughts is that ring of metal and hybrid bone spear is going to be at the top, and just below that you'll have bone spear, which will be in the hand balance scale, would be at the top end, whereas ring of metal is going to be above it. And where the bloods are going to land on this list, I don't know. I can't tell.
Yeah, I'll give a slightly different prediction. I think the nerf to Bone Spear is significant. It's like a 4 or 5x nerf, and Bone Spear was a lot better than every other build, so that's the one thing that it has going for it. I think Bone Spear is going to fall. I still think it's going to be viable. I still think it's going to be good. Maybe it'd be like A tier, top of B tier would be my prediction. I think there is definitely going to be a blood build, whether it's Blood Lance or maybe Blood Surge, that might be better. The minions are the big question mark to me. As Ghazzy said, they could be godly. Every time in the past, ever, on pretty much any game ever, where I thought minions were going to be godly, they never end up being godly. It's never a good idea to ever bet on minions in any game in any patch ever.
Don't tell me that. You're killing me.
Well, I mean, it's just the way that it goes, buddy. I think the one of the best builds already was Infinimist, and I think relatively Infinimist just gets better. So I'm guessing if you have the right gear, Infinimist is gonna be the go-to. I mean, I just think that build is gonna rule, unless I'm missing something. I think that build's just gonna destroy the game very slowly, but like at the speed of Necro, as Echo Hack says. But I think that build's gonna rule.
But my Thorns minion, don't take this from me. They just did something with the Thorn Sapphics.
I'm a big minion player. Like that's the main thing I've been doing for the past decade when it comes to content as well. Like I've always loved minions and ARPGs. It started with Diablo 2. Diablo 3 was a fiasco. I played Witch Doctor, and then a guy tricked me into playing PoE. They said, "Oh, minions are functional. I play it." They were not. And then I took it upon myself to make it viable, and here we are a decade later. But it's like I think that you're definitely on point with some of the parts of it. When it comes to speed, the Infinimist or Exploding Shadow Mist, it has a variety of different names, but the Infinimist build, right? That was made originally by Nakobon, yeah. And he made a crit version out of it, which was absolutely insane. And most of us guide creators, we've adapted and made our very versions of it. Myself, I know Echo, I think Microbio did as well from the Maxwell Boys. So we've all made our versions of it, and it's just been such a good build. But most importantly, that's been because of the inherent defensive layer, right? We stack up the CDR triggers so that we can basically just sit inside the Shadow Mist whilst all our damage is kicking. But now with the changes to crit, I feel like we're going back to the less gear demanding approach of it, which is just generic dot. You're not focusing on the crits from the Shadow Blight key passive. You're focusing more on the actual damage over time effect, which is also carried with some extra buffs from the Vampiric power. So I think that that's definitely one of those builds that's going to be in the top section of Necromancer builds in general, but not so much crit version, more so with the actual dot approach to it. And I think that's a really good change, similar to the blood, where blood and dots are now being brought up from the lower section and they're being put up in the I wouldn't say playable state, because they are playable, but more viable, if you will. I think that would be a good way to put it.
Playable plus.
Playable plus, yes. But I mean, that's all Necromancers. So if stepping away from Necromancers when it comes to the patch notes, I think it was you, DM, that mentioned like rogues didn't get that many quality of life changes. wudijo, since you're like the rogue master around here, what's your take on the patch notes? Like, how much of a big impact does it have, if any?
Well, I actually spent the last 2 nights just theory crafting the new rogue builds and updating the guides and stuff. And I'm actually very content. So they didn't do much, but what they did was actually really good. And not so much from the rogue specific changes necessarily, they were also good, like buffing some underused passives like Impetus and buffing like Blade Shift, for example. I think that's actually a legit generator you can use now. And together with the vulnerable nerfs, for example, like Puncture is not really like this, non plus ultra, like have to use Puncture for vulnerable, and it's just like the best basic skill in every single situation. So that's really nice. And in general, I mean, Rogue has been a very balanced class, and it remains a pretty balanced class overall, with like many builds just being like solid. When you log in, the build works, nothing to worry about, and you blast. So that's how Rogue works right now, and that's really amazing. So no one can really complain, I guess. And they did actually make Ray of Arrows like a really viable, strong option now. So I've been theory crafting that yesterday, and that looks really fun, and I'm gonna have such a blast with it, I think. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. But in general, yeah, rogues are on a really nice spots right now.
That's fair. Would you say that the devs or the leaders, higher ups, are biased towards rogue? Because it feels like rogue is the only class that doesn't have this plethora of issues or requirements of balancing.
The thing is that Rogue is a much more simple class than other classes. So, it's like mechanically more intense, I guess, as Max described earlier. But from the mechanical perspective, like from like the how you make a build, like playing the build might be difficult, but how you make the build is relatively simple actually on Rogue. So there's no crazy shenanigans of like, 7 different interactions working together to give you like ridiculous amounts of lucky hit procs and of that thing, and then use that for another thing or whatever, right? There's no Shadow Blight. There is no like Tempest Roar. These mechanics are just missing from Rogue, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Remember we talked about different classes work differently and stuff like that, and Rogue, Rogue just works basically. So that's the thing. It's very easy to balance Rogue the way that the class works as a whole compared to other classes. So I can see that it's kind of like a natural product of how they made the game and how they made the Rogue class, I think.
That's fair. That's fair. You guys have any other opinions or takes on it?
On all of the classes or Rogue? Oh, go on, Rex.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask on all it takes on all of the classes or on the Rogue specifically.
No, like the Rogue specifically is what I'm thinking.
I mean, it looks the same to me, I guess. I'm not really a Rogue expert. I looked good before. It looks good now. It looks like it's always been good. If you liked Rogue before, you're going to like Rogue now. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Rogue specifically, it's like, okay, let's talk about, you just look at the like mechanics of the game. Let's start with like movement speed. All right, who moves the fastest? Well, Rogues run at the speed of light, and they have 2 dashes. So probably Rogue. Who does like who's gonna like just annihilate the boss? Well, probably the Twisting Blade Rogue, who has like godly resource generation with whatever that shadow power is with the shadow imbue. Oh, it's Rogue. Who has the best ability to dodge mechanics? Okay, wait, it's Rogue. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think something's going on there. Like Rod is saying he's playing like Thorn's Necro. I think that's just a cover up. He's probably just playing Rogue. Rogues have everything. So it's like Woody was talking about. Yeah, I really like when all the classes are balanced. Every class should have their weakness. I'm gonna play Rogue every single day.
I like how Woody's just sitting there being like, right,
everything.
shut up, they're gonna nerf it, shut up.
They have everything.
No, I'm not worried about that. I mean, there is one thing they have to nerf, or rather fix. There's a bug with poison imbuement that makes especially a Twisting Blades build way too powerful for bossing and stuff. But I mean, outside of that, I don't think that Rogue is like obscenely strong or something. It has like, at least in the past, like Rogue was just kind of like, fast, especially early game. It was just like fast by default because of Dash and Shadow Step, etc. And then later on, like other classes just catch up or even overtake it. So this is what we have seen in season 1. This is what I've seen in preseason. Once the Druids, they get a Tempest Roar online, and those are the dominant builds in the end game basically. And Rogue remains good, but it doesn't remain at the number 1 spot basically. And it's gonna be very similar again now. Like Rogue is just kind of like, it starts at a higher point, but it doesn't reach the same highest point that other classes do, I think. So it has like a smaller progression than other classes, kind of like starting very low and aiming very high. So I think this is more what we're gonna see.
It's like
But
a limited
for people
ceiling.
that, yeah, exactly. So again, like because you don't have these crazy shenanigans on Rogue with like, let's say like these Tempest Roars and Shadow Blight and these mechanics that make these other classes like so much more special and like much harder to balance out. Similarly, Rogue just doesn't have these scaling factors that other classes have. I think there's just like fewer knobs to turn, like fewer things to like really like try to min max and I think this is kind of like how that turns out in the end. And I wouldn't really say that Rogue is like so much more powerful than other classes. So all classes have like really good builds now, and yeah, I think in general they've done a pretty good job at balancing different builds and classes. So they've also fixed most of the bugged builds, Bulwark and these kind of things. So the Hydra, and well, one big remaining bug is the poison imbue. So I was kind of surprised to see them buff bursting venoms, but okay, I mean, Rogue's gonna have an easy time against the bosses this season, and in season 3 that's gonna be gone, and that's it, I guess.
Sounds about right.
And Woody gets a pass because he plays the rogue archetype in every single game all the time. So we give him a pass.
Sounds like
I'm
me
not
with
gonna play only
Necromancer.
Twisting Blades though, so I'm gonna try the other builds.
No, it's all good. I'm just messing with you.
I think you, Rax, have the most experience with sorcerers, unless I'm wrong. What's your take on the patch notes there? If we want to kick that off with the sorcerer class.
I think I spent some time leveling Sorcerer lately, and I looked at the patch notes, obviously, for Sorcerer. In general, I really like Sorcerers, and I think that's like a popular class for most people. I think Sorcerers are going to feel really good for casuals. You got no idea what you're doing. You pick one of their core skills. If you pick like, I guess you got to pick Arc Lash, and you take Teleport and Ice Armor. It feels pretty good, at least for most of the game. When you get into the end game, I think Sorcerers are going to start to fall behind. I haven't talked to Northwar, and I should ask him like what his final conclusion was for the firewall build. Obviously, it's probably going up, but it was already very low ranked, and I'm not of the opinion that they did enough for that to make it like a top tier build. I would love for firewall to be godly. Firewall absolutely rules for leveling. I leveled 1 to 40 on Sorcerer, only 5 minutes slower than my Blood Surge Necro, and Blood Surge Necro is just out of this world. So firewall being only 5 minutes behind was crazy, but I don't think it's going to pack the same punch in the end game, and I really hope I'm wrong. Hydra's going up for sure. Well, it's going up and it's going down. They removed like the bug part of it where it does like percentage base health, so Hydra was like their best option in like Nightmare Dungeon 100. So they took away that, but they buffed like the base of Hydra, which I think is an overall win for the future of the game. But again, in doing some basic theory crafting and looking at it, I don't think it's strong enough to make it super viable. I don't think it's going to compete with the Twisting Blade Rogue, the Bleed Whirlwind, or the Rupture Barb. I don't think it's going to compete with the Infinimist Necro or one of the really good blood builds. I think so. To summarize it, I think the beginning of Sorcerer is going to feel good. I think the end game, I don't know what you're going into. Is Blizzard still their best build? I don't really know.
I don't really have much to chime in on when it comes to Sorcerer due to my limited experience with it, so I'm just gonna refer. I don't like making comments on things that I know very little of because I just sound like stupid. But DM, Moody, you guys have any takes? Start with you, DM, on the Sorcerer.
I think I'm mostly excited. Don't they have a new vulnerability application now? Because previously they were pretty limited on the amount of vulnerability they could do, right? I was trying to look through because I'm looking through the notes right now, and I thought there was a new application they could do that actually generated vulnerability on somebody through lightning, if I remember correctly.
Think, yeah, exactly. There's like a lightning thing. This is on the Paragon board somewhere, and I guess the second thing would be one of the vampiric powers.
Yeah.
You can very easily apply vulnerable now, but my take on that is, well, vulnerable doesn't matter anymore. This is 2023, and
That's what I was
vulnerable
gonna
has just
say,
been
yeah.
nerfed for the 3rd time in a row. And now you don't actually need it anymore. So you can actually play a Sorg and without having to press Frost Nova every 5 seconds. And I think in general, Sorgs are looking like in a pretty good spot. They have gotten some pretty massive buffs throughout season 1 already. And now they've gotten like a bunch more things, and they're looking like kind of exciting. I think the only thing that seems like really like far-fetched is like a charged bolts build at this point, but even that got some pretty massive buff. So outside of that, I think like basically all the core skills, all of the mastery skills, they have like their own builds, and they're all going to be at least fine, I think. And yeah, Firewall is definitely like way better than before. Okay, let's not talk about the Incinerate. I think let's ignore Incinerate, but
Yeah,
basically, yeah, outside of that, I think there's a lot of different builds on Sorc, and they're also like Sorcs have the tendency to kind of like really start going ham later in the game. Like when you are level 100 or approaching 100, and you have good gear, you have lots of cooldown, you have your teleport enchantment, and you're gonna like fly around with teleport, and like Sorcs kind of like speed up more than other classes over time, I think. And this is like one of the strengths they have. So I think they're gonna be feeling pretty good.
You don't like the Incinerate? I mean, we get bathed in blood, Vampiric power to get a pool of
Oh yeah,
blood
yeah,
when you're
that makes
channeling.
sense. Yeah, they even previewed it in the trailer, right? Did you see that Incinerate Sorc there with the pool of blood? Like,
Yep.
crazy,
Oh
yeah.
man, I wish whenever they introduce like in their dev streams and whatnot and their reveals, I wish they would like show us the powers instead of just talking about it, like, oh yeah, bathed in blood, look at this channeling things, and you're looking at it, it's like, yeah, no, that does not look fun. That looks slow. That looks bad. That's exactly the vision I have of the ability. I'm not gonna touch that. That's my experience of it. Similar to how they introduced the new monster types, right, in the dev stream. They had these two new vampiric monsters, and they're like, oh, they have these cool abilities. And we were just sitting there watching this model spin 360 whilst they were talking about it. It's like, just show us, Don't show us a level 5 character killing a skeleton and give a shot. It's like, show us the powers, get us hyped up. I feel like that's the same with Incinerate. Because, I mean, who knows? Maybe we have some Sorc masteries around masters that can figure out like a really cool Incinerate build. But I think it seems like we're all four of us are in the same boat when we're talking about Incinerate and channeling skills. It's like, that doesn't look appealing. I mean, am I wrong?
No, I mean, nobody's going to stand there and channel. I think they made it faster, right? You channel for 2 seconds to reach the maximum uptime, and we're supposed to get excited about that. That didn't happen. I do wholeheartedly agree with you, though, on their like presentation of season 2. They asked for feedback like after the dev stream, and that was like I wrote them like a little page, and it was pretty much exactly what you just said. I said, you guys, if I could give you some constructive feedback, I don't think you guys sold season 2 very well. Showing the powers, that wasn't exciting. The monsters spinning the 3D model. It's like, I think you guys can do a much better job selling this season. Didn't show us any of the exciting stuff, to be honest. It was like the most boring part of the presentation.
Well, there's that, and also the whole thing where, for me, it was a lot of repetitive stuff. Like, they show this video where they talk about the lore, and then we have to spend another 30 minutes listening to them recapping what we just listened to. It's like, yes, we know, we saw that. Get on with it. Get to the things that we haven't seen. Talk about those stuff. And I mean, there's been a reoccurring problem with that as well. Even going as far as into the Q&A, for example, they were like, they've answered a question, and then in the Q&A, they're bringing up a question. I understand why, but like they're taking a question that's already been answered in the actual dev stream or in the show or in the previous show the week before, and they're just answering that again. Like, I understand they want to make sure that it looks good and whatnot, that they get definitive answers, I guess. That there's definitely that aspect, but it just feels very annoying sitting here looking at getting new information and getting hyped up for it, and a lot of the stuff we get to hear was just repeating things that's already been answered, or like even the show itself with the teaser trailer. What's your take on that, DM, as well? You the same boat as us?
I wanted to see more of the boss fights. I mean, for me, I feel like that's the whole content. That's what's going to sell it. If someone's going to log back into the game, it's because they want to kill one of the new fucking bosses. I really don't think anyone's going to see a giant red circle of like blood and then log back in. Probably not, if I had to guess. So I I actually want to see once, because I know we don't want to like spoil the whole Uber fight, but once it's launched, I would like to see a dev live stream of them fighting and beating the Uber boss. I think that would be cool. Or someone killing Uber Lilith or something. I guess prefer the new ones for the season, but I kind of like to see that. I think that would be interesting, exciting, maybe get a little faith behind it. And I also think it would make a hell of a lot better trailer than doing the math wrong, probably.
No.
I think it would have been a sick idea to take 5 content creators. Let's take DM, and they throw DM. They give him an NDA. They bring him in a couple weeks early, and they let him fight 30 seconds of Uber Duriel with his minion Necro. And then on the live stream, they say, "All right, let's watch DM fight Uber Duriel for 30 seconds.
God,
let's
the
watch Woody
pressure.
fight. Let's watch Woody fight one of the Uber bosses. Let's watch Ghazzy." I would have loved that. Like, don't spoil the whole boss fight, but let's see DM with his minions for 30 seconds and
I like the idea, and
see
also
how
us
long he
going
can
in
last.
blind. Like going in blind, be like, okay, they've never seen this before. You get 30 seconds, because even if that turns into a fiasco
like that.
performance, it would be entertaining, and it would
Yeah, I
hype
do
people
like
up, and
that.
they get to see some of the abilities, and they get to see whoever content creators there doing this fight, basically just screaming at the top of their lungs, having no idea where to stand. I think that could be a really cool thing, but at least it's much better than what we saw right now. Are you in the same boat on this, Woody?
That's a really cool idea, to be honest. Yeah, it's just like, okay, here's the new boss fight. You have 2 minutes, and we record you and go. Like that. And then you just get kicked out, and never again. So, I mean, that'd be hilarious. I just need to do that with a bunch of guys, like a bunch of content creators. It's gonna be very funny, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they just need to give you like a very mid character. Like, here's an 85 character. You have your capped resistances, but no max resistance. We gave you reasonable 820 gear when you can get 925 gear. All right, you have 2 minutes, and we're recording you, and we're gonna embarrass you in front of the whole world. All right, here you go. You got 30
That'd be
seconds.
good.
We don't want, the whole point is not to spoil it. We're not spoiling the boss fight, but let's see what Woody can do for 30 seconds here.
No. And like it would just allow people to see some of the abilities, see a portion of the fight. Like obviously we're expecting faces like Uber Lilith, so it's like just 30 seconds. Like, show it up, show it, and it would. I like the idea of having a content creator do it, because then you get the entertainment value of the reaction of that as well. I think that there's a really good way to merge it into a way that would not just hype people up; it would also create this entertainment value, and that would just elevate the whole releases, and the hype up and all of those would just go from kind of a low mid tier right now. They did way better this time than they did with season 1, that's for sure. I mean, bring it up that within their hand balance to go up to the sweet spot. I think that would be really nice to see.
I mean, the thing is with these bosses, though, like I wouldn't really expect them to be like very difficult. Like outside of Duriel, I don't expect any challenge whatsoever for like any build that is not absolutely terrible. I think as long as you can do like 9 dungeons of your own level, you're probably gonna be fine against those bosses. I don't think they're like gonna be a challenge. I don't think they're intended to be a challenge. And Duriel apparently is harder than the others, because of Uber drops and whatnot, but still easier than Lilith. And they also already mentioned that Lilith is supposed to be accessible by also most, if not every build. So they want to bring down Uber Lilith and then Duriel below that. So yeah, considering there is a cost and you can, potentially fail the fight and that's it, then I think they're kind of like more going on the side of making the bosses like easier than they would otherwise have to, I guess, because they don't have unlimited attempts. I mean, I don't see an issue with like making a system where, at least Duriel, for example, is kind of tough, but you get multiple attempts when you summon him. So maybe not, don't just have like one shot. But I guess this is what they went with in the end. I'm not sure exactly.
Well, in the words of an individual who has a malignant tunnel, he went out on Twitter and said, balance is not a journey. It's not about the destination, it's the journey. So they're working on the endgame content, right? So we're on this journey now. We're finally taking the right turn and going on the correct road now to success from my perspective. And these steps in the right direction is that we're getting some endgame content. And now with these assets in play and these bosses, there's nothing stopping them from evolving that or developing that to allow us to do Uber Duriel, for example, and those type of approaches where suddenly you have even more proper aspirational content, which was the idea of Uber Lilith, right? So I think that it's definitely happening a lot slower than most of us, if not all of us, would like to see, but it's getting there, right? So these first steps, I think, is needed for incentivizing features of engaging with these fights and the boss fights and whatnot. And I definitely agree with the idea that Duriel is going to be significantly manageable by most players from our perspective. But then again, season 3 come around. Hopefully, they'll have, based on the takes of the statements they've made about it, focusing on the end game, to look at more aspirational content. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind that Uber Lilith, that sure there was a lot of people who did it, but it's still just a fraction of the actual player base. It's a very small portion of it. Granted, it's the portion that most content creators would engage with, I assume, but it's still a very small portion of it. So I understand why that hasn't been a huge focus to invest money and dev time on, to sort the 1% players to make them happy, when other things have been more important from a business perspective. But at the same time, like, that's covered. The game's great up till you're done with the campaign. Like that part was actually really good for the most part.
Campaign was good.
Yeah.
Campaign was good. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a guy that played ARPGs half my life, and I never care about lore, but I did pay attention to the Diablo stuff. So I know more about Diablo lore than I do about Path of Exile I played for a decade. So that says something.
I kind of agree with Woody about wanting more hardcore challenges. I'm thinking of PoE, right? And Shaper was where I was at last. Basically, I did Syrian Exarch, but now I'm on Shaper. I did a couple of the other smaller ones. And knowing that Shaper kicked my ass and I have to go back and do it is making me excited for next league, because I know there's a hard fight for me to try to get to and then beat that one. And then there's like 3 or 4 more after that. And I'm still on the tutorial version of the boss. I haven't even hit the Uber version and what have you, right? So it's knowing there is basically a shitload of boss fights ahead of me to try to learn makes the earlier part of the game feel more sustainable to me, because I'm getting somewhere. There's actually an objective. Whereas I feel like part of the problem is we don't have enough of these Uber Lilith fights. So people that are maybe early aren't going to want to sit through as much. Once they're bored, they're immediately like, well, the game's over, because they're not looking at these stretch goals. So even though a smaller percentage of people that play the game may never beat the content, having the goals in and of themselves, I think actually does help the early part of the game too, because it gives you a reason why to work on and build. Maybe the 70s and 80s wouldn't be so bad if by the time you had 90s, you got a reason to have built a strong character by then, and at the hundreds, etc., more Ubers. So for me, I kind of hope we do get harder bosses. If we only ever bring the skill ceiling and the build ceiling down, then from the beginning, everyone say this game's too easy, minus the Uber Lilith fight, really. So I don't. It probably doesn't need to get easier. We probably need harder shit. Would be my take.
I mean, yeah, to piggyback off of what you said, the most enjoyable 5 days that I've played Diablo for, which I hope there were no small children watching my streams those days, because they'll be scarred for life for some of the things that I said, was getting ravaged by Uber Lilith. People thought I was losing my mind, and I was, but I just had so much fun trying this boss that almost nobody had killed. After they buffed her, it was just so difficult. That's when I had fun for the game. Yeah, I know it's the 1%ers, but as DM said, I think the aspirational content is more valuable than some people would think it is. Just the idea that one day it's for setting goals. I would like to kill this boss, and if Blizzard would do a better job. Here's one thing that's very confusing to me. They introduce Uber Duriel, and Uber Duriel drops by far, not even close, the best loot in the game. Why didn't they take that opportunity to update Uber Lilith's loot table? Now,
Amen.
I understand. Well, there's one key difference, though. There is one key difference. You can just keep plugging Uber Lilith. You could just farm her 100 times a day.
True.
You find one bug build, and then, okay, you have 100 Shakos. That's one problem, but I think updating her loot table to do, I don't know, something would have been a very nice change, especially because I believe Adam Jackson mentioned that he thinks, he's not sure, but there's not going to be these 10 standard deviations from the mean builds that are just way better than everything else. And if that's true, then maybe it was time to give a little bit better rewards there. But yeah, I completely agree with DM's sentiment. Like, this aspirational content, to me, is what makes the game fun. Not everyone would agree with that. A lot of casuals don't care about that, but I think it's more important than some people give it credit for.
That's fair. I like what you said with the most enjoyable was your 5 days in Uber Lilith. Like, from my perspective, I love launches. Doesn't matter which game it is. Like the first week of playing during a new launch, new season, whatever. Like that's like the epiphany, like that peak of enjoyment for me. But outside of that window, then I also agree that the Uber Lilith for me was the most enjoyable part. I didn't want to go in with a Bone Spear build and just one shot it. I wanted to do something that hasn't been done before. So I went in with a minion build. And no one had killed it on a minion build, and it ended up with me racing against a guy called CinityX, who, shout out to him, he beat me with, I don't know, 14 hours or something. I got it the day after. And it was just that time frame of those days and those multiple wipes. It was so bad. I spent 100 million on repair costs. I had to beg my chat for gold to keep going. It was real bad at the end. We finally got it. And when you killed it, it was like, this dopamine rush was better than any item I've ever picked up in the game, was better than any reaching level 100, finishing a race. It was just that enjoyment of just getting the kill. The loot was terrible, but I killed it, and it was just the best feeling ever. So I definitely agree with that take as well. Woody, what's your take on the aspirational content?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously an argument that not many people ever get to see Lilith, let alone like really attempt or even beat her. But I think there is also nothing holding the devs back from making more of these things, right? I mean, okay, Uber Lilith is clearly a fight where they have spent a lot of effort making it. Like the music, the atmosphere, like it was also like somewhat well balanced. If you don't think about like like bugged builds and stuff. So I think that they did a really good job with Uber Lilith. It's a great fight. Just if you actually play the fight, like all the way. So it's just that not many people will do it, and that's okay. Like having these challenges in a game for like the blasters, something to look forward to, like Rax described, like a goal, even for the people that are not like the absolute, Omega, Diablo cracks or something. Maybe not now, but maybe in like half a year, maybe they end up with some super powerful build for whatever reason, right? There's some power creep, or they just happen to have like a really strong build, or they happen to play a season longer than usual. And at some point, they're going to think, hey, this is the time, now I'm going to do Lilith. And it's going to have the same feeling of accomplishment, even if right now they're kind of indifferent. So I think that over time, there's going to be more people like actually like getting to that goal simply through the progression of the game and through playing the game more, and also just getting better at the game. Like there's not just progression of the game itself and power creep, but there's also the players that learn the game more, that the basically power creep of playing the game more, basically, right? So I think that even if there's still an overwhelming majority of people that do not ever fight Lilith or beat her, I think having some of these encounters, at least in the game, is very important, because it gives these stretch goals that I think the end described. There needs to be more of these encounters. I think there needs to be like varying difficulty levels of this, and this is also what we're seeing now with like season 2 already. With like there's Druid now. There's kind of like a stepping stone towards maybe a stronger boss fight later, like Lilith. Right now we don't have more of them, but eventually we will have more of them, I think. And there's going to be like varying degrees of difficulty, right? Similar to how we have normal Shaper, and then we have like Eater and Exarch, and then we have Maven, and then we have the Uber versions of these in PoE, right? And there can just be like multiple levels. It's just that right now Lilith is like so far beyond anything else in difficulty that it seems really pointless. But if they add more steps in the middle, and potentially after Lilith as well at some point, then I think this is a good investment for the game overall.
Yeah, I like the idea of like. Go ahead, Rex.
Yeah, just not to beat a dead horse here, so I completely agree with Woody, but you always hear the counter argument that, kind of like Woody was saying, that so many people don't even go for Uber Lilith. They haven't even beat the campaign. They play for 10 hours and then they quit. The reason why, so first of all, there's no secret that the casual player base, like the most people, that's what determines the health of the game. Everybody understands that. But if you make that argument, then you could make that argument about anything that we're talking about. When we're talking about, balancing the classes or whatever, if you're just going to log in for fun and you're going to play for 10 hours and you're going to throw together a random build and put on the random items that you get, there's no point to have any of these high-level discussions about literally anything. Like Blizzard is already giving those people content. You have a quest line that doesn't take very long to do. You get a couple of vampiric powers. There's a new outdoor thing to do. They're building out the base game. If you're just going to, if the casual players are just going to play so few hours, I think making the argument that adding aspirational content doesn't matter because they can't reach it. Well, the beginning of the game is already fun. That's the arguably the only fun part of the game right now. So it's just something that I hear all the time that I think is just completely wrong. I just wanted to get that out there.
I mean, that's fair. I like the idea of having like stretch goals, like you mentioned, DM. And the idea that PoE has been doing with Uber versions of the bosses feels to me that it would fit very well into the category of filling the void between the current new iteration of Endgame bosses versus Uber Lilith, which is way above. By making Uber versions of these fights, the Uber version doesn't necessarily have to be harder than Uber Lilith. It could land in that segment. The Beast in the Eyes, Varshan, or those things. An Uber version of those could be moved into the point of it's just in between Duriel and Uber Lilith. And, an Uber Duriel could be harder than Uber Lilith. Suddenly you have a wider span of aspirational stretch goal content to strive towards. I think that would be a really cool thing to see. And I hope that's going to happen, besides new bosses and whatnot for the end game, to build up this very skinny leg that needs to go back to the gym and build up some muscles to get to that thick part where we like go into the end game and feel like, yeah, well, I can do this and this, and there's so many goals in front of me that I can go to. But instead of having a stretch goal, at the distance to the moon, you actually have increments of steps you can take as you progress your way through there. And that's been like the biggest problem, right? You get to like 60, level 70, 75, and then there's nothing. Now you just get to max yourself up to the highest end before you're able to kill Uber Lilith. And then, that time frame in between is just so dull for a lot of people. And I think that's a big detrimental part as to why not more people rather haven't gone for Uber Lilith. Because there's definitely a lot of gamers that invest a lot of time into the games, and if they're not entertained or kept in this atmosphere, this bubble of enjoyment for their time invested, I think that's definitely going to make those people just crack the bubble and go play something else. Something that can help with that is obviously the dopamine parts of getting upgrades, which is definitely something we're changing. Is coming with change of season 2 as well. I mean, item power is now the harder content you engage with, the lower ceiling or the floor is going to be raised up. So the harder you do, the higher the chance of you getting better loot that you actually might be wanting to equip and whatnot. So there's definitely a lot of changes happening that's taking these steps in the right direction that I'm actually very excited for.
It's okay at this point in the game too to focus on more stretch content, because if you think about it, when the game was originally heavily marketed and it's just launching, it makes more sense to be like, oh, we're casual focused. The most average person is going to be playing the game. It's one of the most marketed, if not the most marketed game in the world at that moment. Everyone and their mom's going to play, people way outside the genre. But as the game evolves and becomes older, it's settling into, okay, it's one of the seasonal ARPGs that all the ARPG players are going to go between. The demographic in which they're targeting, depending upon the launch time of the game, is changing. It's going from every single person we can possibly grab to the people that play these types of games. And tons of people have already played the game and experienced what it had to offer for the average player, and now you can start developing it to the people that stayed to keep them. I think it's fine to kind of change focus to a little bit at this point.
I like that take a lot, because I mean we've seen, like you mentioned, the main focus, and like Rax said as well, like what creates a 1% player aspirational game chaser category of players, they only exist if the 99% players exist. And for them to exist, the game has to cater to the casual players. So you have a game that's been doubling down on the idea that you have your regular 9-to-5 worker, comes home from work, feeds their children, puts them to bed, spends some time with their wife. Suddenly the doorbell rings. Oh, it's your wife's boyfriend. They go have some fun times. You sit in the couch, pop a few brewskis, and play the game for 2 hours to rinse, repeat the day after. And I mean, that's kind of like the approach that they've been going for. And that's fine. But like you said, the players that keep playing the game for the seasonal content aren't the people that are inexperienced. Sorry, I can't stop laughing looking at you, Wudi. So what I was trying to say was the catering, like you mentioned, the focus of the players that actually keeps playing are the people that are aware and enjoys the idea of seasonal content, because there were so many people that came into the game who had no idea why they had to level a new character every 3 months, why they had to, reset their entire progression every 3 months. That was so confusing for so many people. Whereas everyone who has played any RPG since, the ladders were introduced in D2 back in 2004 or whatever it was, and it's like, that's just the way it is. That's the norm. That's how ARPGs are played. Welcome. Because if they don't have that, then you're going to play the game for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then you're done with it. The way this replayability and the longevity of the game is sustained is through seasonal content. But I definitely like the take of it focusing on a different type of player base now. And I also think that from a business perspective, that seems like a more logical approach to it. Now that that's the case, now they have to make sure that those people are satisfied, and that's when we see endgame focused content coming out. But maybe that's just looking at it black and white and not seeing the gray, I guess. But that's how I see it.
So I worked in corporate America for 10 years, and we always talked about two different things about the customers that we were serving, which is what DM is alluding to. One of them is acquisition, bringing them in. And the other one is retention, keeping them. And one thing that I think has went wrong for Blizzard is I don't think Blizzard was planning to be very heavy in the retention phase of their game this early. I think they were thinking acquisition for a long time. I think they thought that everything would go very well, but we learned that if you release an incomplete game, then you have to focus on retention almost immediately. But you look at like the Steam announcement, for example, that's definitely a big acquisition play. They're trying to reach everybody. The merger with Microsoft, that's going to hopefully reach a lot more people. So I think Blizzard is trying to stop the bleeding, but from everything that I'm seeing, like looking at it from the corporate lens, which has been most of my life, seems like they're trying to get back into the phase of bringing people in. They want the swimming pool to grow to a pond and eventually to an ocean at that point. And the retention should happen naturally if you just make good seasons and keep making quality of life changes and just add end game content. It should happen naturally. But I kind of like to finish the point here with what you said, DM. If I was like the leader of Blizzard, I would say, if we're focusing on retention right now, we messed up tremendously, and it should be acquisition at this point.
I like the take of it as well. I mean, something that's been very clear from my perspective, looking at a corporate lens, has been like the decisions made and the way they've developed in the early stages have felt more like they care more about the $ value of the company to the next quarter for their shareholders rather than the next following 10 quarters. And obviously that can have some part to do with the Microsoft merger. I believe that was confirmed a few days ago that it's finally actually happening, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And at the same time, they're doing the same thing they did with COD and that other game, Overwatch. It's landing on Steam, and I think that is a decision where they're going to lose a little bit of profit per sale whilst they're increasing the amount of sales, which would, from my perspective, go into the idea of acquisition rather than retention, right? Because dropping it into Steam is definitely going to get it more attention to people that might not have bought it if it wasn't on Steam. So it's going to be very interesting to see not just the Twitch directory, but also the generic amount of players coming back to play Season 2, seeing the changes. And I definitely think there's going to be people that's going to hold off a bit to see other people go through the season and then make a decision whether or not they think that the changes are enough of a step in the right direction. At the same time, we also have most of us are very active within the guide writing section. You guys from Maxwell and I'm with Icy Veins, so it's going to be very interesting to see the traffic that the guys are going to generate compared to the previous seasons as well, because that's a good pointer to see how attractive the game is, since a large portion of the player base is the super casual, because that's where the acquisition has been focused on before. And those people, they're not the people watching any of our streams right now. They're not the people watching our YouTubes or the dev streams. They're just people coming home from work, sitting on the couch playing it on console for a few hours. Or maybe they look up a guide, right? So it's going to be very fun to see how the numbers are looking now moving forward. And I think that a lot of people will pick up the game again if these changes are done and executed in a good way, even a week, maybe 2 weeks into the season launch as well. So I'm very excited for to see these things.
Game Pass is going to be goated.
Yeah. The Microsoft merge is going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with Blizzard in general. Game Pass. I mean, we got subscription paid games like World of Warcraft, for example, and stuff like that as well. I have no idea what's going to happen. But
I remember seeing like I don't know, some months ago or something. There was like this Xbox event or something where they said like, okay, in the next 12 months, these games are coming to Game Pass or something. But Diablo 4 was not one of them. So it was like explicitly stated as not being on the pass. But maybe that will change in the future. Who knows? But I remember seeing something like that at least. So I think they still expect you to buy the game, but probably on other platforms now as well. So.
mm-hmm. Did you guys see the trailer or the hype up video they made with the merger, where they showed
Yeah.
up the
Oh,
games?
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was such a video.
It's miles better than I ever expected it to be. It was really well made. It's really cool. Definitely worth a watch. So it was really cool to see. There's some Diablo footage in there as well, but it's more about them showing some Microsoft games and Blizzard games and weaving them together as now it's on one family kind of thing. It's pretty cool. But I don't know if it's going to have, like you guys said, as well with the Diablo landing on the Game Pass. I don't think so. I think that their main focus right now will be to see how the numbers will look with the game being launched on Steam, similar to what happened to COD and Overwatch, right? Where the games definitely sold more, but obviously they're taking a profit cut from Steam's contracts. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And if they do these steps in the right direction, that's definitely going to, well, from our perspective, if I'm not mistaken, I feel like we are in the same boat of wanting them to deliver so well in their performance of these changes that we refer to as taking a step in the right direction, which is mostly about retention. Because it feels like you're kind of done with the game within a week's time if you play a lot, more if you're a casual approach to it in terms of quantity of hours invested. And with more aspirational content and or target farming things like the bosses and whatnot, that allows us to have maybe even double that time. And I'll be honest, if I get 2 weeks of proper full out enjoyment from the game, I'm more than satisfied, since we are playing these seasonal things and then come back on the next season, do it again. So if the more they work on that, the more fun I'll have with the game, and maybe we can turn this whole meme of D4 bad into D4 good very soon.
I think one thing to remember here is always that season 3 is coming, Copium, and season 3 is probably helping a lot with this problem, right? So they said they've been working on the system. They're going to introduce leaderboards. They have been targeting season 3 for a long time for this, I think. And they said they're going to introduce like a new endgame system that is like made for that leaderboard stuff. So I imagine we're going to see something going in the direction of Greater Rifts from D3, for example, or so. And there is also BlizzCon coming, and that's actually quite soon, right? So I would definitely expect that they will kind of like, keep it low for now. Like, okay, here's season 2. They did 2 live streams of 2 hours just for season 2. It is a big patch. And, after everyone has been blasting now for a few weeks, we have the BlizzCon, and this is probably when they're really going to do like a huge push for Diablo 4 as well, I imagine. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the expansion announcement there. If they are aiming for actual annual expansions, then this is the time basically. And they can announce it for like, I don't know, end of next year or whatever, right? Or summer or whatever. I mean, if they say annual expansions, I wouldn't really trust them to be exactly on the dot like 12 months. So we know how that went in WoW, I guess, with annual expansions. But it means that we're gonna get regular, relatively large updates, right? And this is where we're gonna see a lot of this stuff coming. And I'm pretty sure that with them kind of like working, like somewhere in the corner, outside of this whole like, okay, season 1 cycle, season 2 cycle, etc. They have been preparing for months for season 3 already, basically, with something new and something hopefully very exciting to do long term as well, like post 100. So I think there's gonna be a lot more like content to do, basically added just because of that leaderboard system.
Yeah.
Am I?
That's
Go ahead, Dan.
No, go on, Rex.
I was just gonna say, am I the only one with every fiber in my being that hopes that their comment about having annual expansions was not literal? Like, okay, they're gonna have regular expansions, right? But if they're like trying to stick to a 1-year cadence, to me that just means that the content is going to be watered down and probably just not executed very well. So I hope they I hope that they have big plans for expansions that are going to be incredible, and that they announce their release dates whenever they're done and ready to go, to avoid something like Diablo 4 happen. I think if they come out every 12 months and they're very minor and just not very well done, I think we're just going to go back to the same point that Diablo 4 was at before. I think a lot of people have already written Diablo off forever already. And the people that are kind of interested again in coming back, if it happens again with one bad expansion on the first expansion, I think that's just completely over. That's just how I feel about it.
Path of
That's a
Exile
pretty
does
real
this.
take.
Sorry?
I was just saying, I think that's a pretty real take. I tend to agree with that. I think most people have already written off Diablo 4 forever. And
Definitely.
for the most part, they're only going to come back if they see something like absolutely game changing. Are they going to come back to spend another $50 when I'm seeing so many people leave comments like, I just want a refund? Probably not. There's already battle passes to buy. So selling that on top of yearly expansion, I don't see that being a good move either.
I think what Path of Exile does has been really, really good. They have like significantly impactful expansions rather rarely, but they also have what is referred to as like a base expansion that they do every year. That's basically how their rotation of cycles goes. So they have a league every it's been every 4 months, but the idea is every 3 months. And then they have one big release every year, which kind of like changes the core of not super big things, but we're in the idea of let's use a reference of like War of the Atlas expansion in PoE. It was basically just a bigger league launch, but in there they made some minor changes. Some of the endgame bosses were shifted around, and the endgame content got a little bit more of a fine tuning and changes to it. And suddenly the base game got a little bit of a makeover, if you will, to make it a little bit better, more attractive. But it wasn't like, hey, this is going to change the mechanics of how builds work. Here's a new class and whatnot. That was not like their idea, like a big expansion. It was just an expansion that changed parts of the core endgame content, because the campaigns remain the same and all of that. So they changed how the Atlas system works, and the introduction of Maven Boss and either Searing Exarch or Uber Elder and those things. They came with these big expansions, which was essentially just a bigger seasonal launch, if you will. And then they had PoE 2 is one of the biggest thing that they're going to release soon. And then, they went into this new core baseline approach of the game, and then they added seasons on that throughout the next year. And then the next year came around, they'd be like, okay, let's just make a big update here. We're going to change how this works and whatnot. And I really hope that that's what they're planning to do, and not have an annual expansion where it's like, hey, this is going to be, we're going to add a new zone, we're going to add 2 new classes and do that every year. Because then I'm kind of on board with what you're saying, Rex. But if they make changes that once a year they're going to have a bigger seasonal content that is just not here's new Vampiric powers with a new boss, or here's Malignant Hearts with a boss gated to that specific mechanic, but rather be like, this is a new expansion, now you can do 2 different versions of Nightmare Dungeons, and changes the way the endgame works a little bit, and have it more of a, if they're going to be referred to as an expansion, because that's an easy way for them to charge people $20, $30, $40 for it, but allow them to have that change become more of a bigger seasonal content, rather than what we think an expansion would be referring to. Like an expansion in WoW is like, hey, you're gonna get 10 more levels and everything changes, the entire world changes. I don't think we're gonna see that. I really hope that we're more going to be in the boat of, it's just a bigger seasonal content, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying, but I think people are not going to find it acceptable if it's not at least similar to the size of a WoW expansion, because of the last point that you made. You're charging for it. PoE, all this great stuff that they release, it's all for free, right? This has never been paid content. So I think there's a much different sentiment and a much happier community we'll take anything that you'll give me for free. But if they're going to charge us $40 when a lot of people are already feeling like the $70 that they spent for the base game was an incomplete game. If the expansion doesn't do some major things, I don't think people are going to want to pay for it. I don't think people are going to want to pay for it, even if it sounds amazing.
And honestly, I don't even... Sorry, go on, Woody.
All right, yeah, my point is very short. I just think that the sweet spot to hit is probably like making an expansion on the size of like Lords of Destruction or something like that. You know, it's like an extension of the main game. It's not like a WoW expansion where you like completely replace the entire game. Like the way that WoW works is, you know, you take everything that was there and just like make that retro, and then you have a new continent with new stuff, right? And everything else doesn't matter because they always want to jump back in and, you know, catch up and all that. I think what we need is like Lords of Destruction. You know, there might be a new class. There's gonna be like, you know, 2-3 big new zones, you know, on the size of like a Fractured Peaks or something, or maybe a bit smaller. That's okay. And, you know, a bunch of new dungeons, a new endgame system or two, and, you know, a bunch of new bosses, an extension to campaign. And, you know, that is kind of the size that I would hope to see there, I guess, for these expansions, right? And then I also agree they don't have to like literally say like annual expansions, but, you know, if it's 1.5 years, you know, that's fine. You know, if it's even up to 2 years, if it's a bigger one, that's fine, right? And you're gonna see like, you know, 3, 4, 5 expansions over the next decade or whatever. And yeah, that sounds really good to me. So there needs to be somewhere in that direction, I think, to really introduce some big new thing, exactly as Rax said.
For me, I think it's mostly a sentiment thing. I don't think people would begrudge for the actual dollars. I think it's that people in the game are currently feeling owed. Like they feel like they purchased something and they think, you know what? Maybe the average casual person maybe feels like, okay, fine, whatever. They already forgot about the game. But the people who are really into these games, when they spent the $70, they're thinking that I feel like I'm still owed a game, right? So if the solution to that is to sell the product, I mean, people probably have the $40 maybe they can spend on expansion once every other year or something if they're really into their favorite game. But most people are going to think like, you know, basically, fuck you. I'm not giving you another $40. Like, you still owe me. It's the other way around. I'm not willing to buy something at this state of the product. I'm not willing to support that. I think a lot of people want to feel like their product is improving before they're willing to fork over the money, just out of the principle of the thing.
That makes
I
sense.
completely agree.
Yeah. No, definitely. Before I forget, because we talked about the patch notes and the classes, and then we completely ignored Druid and Barb. Chat's being like, yo, what about Druid? What about Barb? So I just want to finish that part of our discussion up. This is what happens, by the way, when we don't have like specific topics to go through. We just take it step by step, see where the conversation goes, and apparently we had more interest to talk about everything else. But for the sake of you guys, let's just tackle it. Let's start with you, Rax. What's your take on the Druid changes with the patch notes?
Well, Druids had a much needed nerf. We can say goodbye to rampaging werebeasts, even though it's actually still godly, right? It's still a godly power. But rampaging werebeasts used to give you 990 crit hit damage, and now it gives you 200. So that impacted a ton of builds. So that brings Druid's stock down. But I think Pulverize has a lot of cool new things. I think the Stormclaw build is going to be godly. Druids in the end game, we've talked about this a lot before. Whoever designed like the fantasy of the Druid had a much better day than most of the other classes. It's like Woody said, rogues don't ever have this transformation, like literally and metaphorically. They're just strong all the time. They get a little bit stronger and then they're just really strong. But Druids, their builds completely transform. You know, when people talk about target farming, the first thing that comes to mind is a Tempest Roar. Completely enables one of the best builds ever. I think Druids will still be really good in the end game. I think Druids are terrible at leveling. I've tried multiple builds, benchmarked them, speed ran them against the other classes. Leveling a Druid is currently an abomination like Barb. So I think Druids will still be good in the end game. It really just takes some work to get there. You got to suffer through leveling, and then you usually have to find a couple key pieces to enable your build. But if you get that far, I think Druids will. I think they're going to destroy the Uber bosses, no problem, and I think they're going to have some of the strongest farming builds in the game.
I think the Druid got the best changes in the patch notes. I feel like Rogue was very small things. Sork was, some minor stuffs as well for the most part. And Necros got a well-deserved nerf and a bug fix with the Bone Prison lucky hits. I feel like it all made sense, which I didn't really feel in the past changes. But Druid, they got an equivalent to an ability for PoE, Blade Vortex, where the whole Hurricane and the Boulder. And I'll be honest, like that's probably one of the things that got me the most hyped from the dev streams. It just looked so beautiful. I think that's going to be a really cool build to see. Yeah.
To work with Nature's Fury too. Like there's that and the Nature's Fury change. Do you see that little line they added in there where the Nature's Fury's cast you get count as both an Earth and a Storm skill?
Yeah.
Which wasn't in the previous, right? So that means that all of these aspects that you have, you're going to be double dipping from with Nature's Fury. So I think Nature's Fury is, and there's 2 new Paragons too around like the, or changed Paragons around the, I think one's called like Thunderstruck, which looks pretty good. And then there's an Earthen Devastation, I think is the other one. And both of those got changed to look decent off of other affixes. So it's going to be a little bit easier to itemize a little bit too. So I actually kind of think Nature's Fury Druid might be really fun. So that was one of the ones that's making me do something other than Thorn Minion. But no, I'm hyped for the Druid for sure this season.
What's your take on it, Woody?
Yeah, personally, I'm also looking forward to trying out the Boulder. I don't really like 100% believe in it right now as being like a top tier build, but at the very least, it's going to be a fun build, I believe. And if it can kind of clear content, that will be good already. But yeah, Nature's Fury is obviously like a very fun mechanic, and that is on my list for sure for this season. For the Barbs, okay, are you talking about Barbs already? I guess.
I only have one thing on Druid I want to chime in on, and that's that's a bait change. They were like, yo, we're going to attempt to, outside of Death's Defense, we're going to attempt to Druid companions or minions. And it was like, hey, your Ravens are going to do more damage. And I'm just looking at it, like, people might actually look at that change and be like, yo, I want to try a companion Druid build. I was like, no, don't. Just no, don't. It's going to be worse than the leveling experience Rax was referring to. It will feel like that till you stop playing that build. That's how bad it's going to be. It just felt like a bait change. Yeah. It's like, why? Yeah. If they're going to change it, make it good,
Well, one thing about companions, though, that I like about Druid is that in the early game, they're actually fairly good, I think. Like if without any supporting stuff or any of the other builds, like you just log in and you have nothing, then companions are actually useful. It's just that, most of the other like powers that Druid gets, like the pulverized power or shockwave, for example, or like the storm chaser for the tornado, like those are so insane compared to the base power of the skill that they completely outclass the companions really fast. But at least without that, companions feel kind of like a nice, they fill a nice early game niche at the very least, I think. And it's kind of fun to play with them. I would really like to see like an actual companion build, because they have like this active component, and you like try to cycle them, and you try to like have your cooldowns ready, and you can reset the cooldowns, and it's actually a kind of cool playstyle in my opinion, because they do something when you press the button, compared to like most Necrominions, for example, where you're just trying to support your army so it doesn't fall apart on its own. So I kind of like how companions play, and they are trying to kind of like make them more viable now with the Vampiric powers, but we're not really getting there probably, but maybe in the future.
Well, remember though, one of the most one thing that should kill your dreams more than anything in Diablo 4 is if a developer point blank tells you that they don't want to do something. And there was a campfire chat back in season 1 where they essentially said, yeah, we hear everybody talking about Druid companions, and we'd like that to be a build, but Necromancers are the minion class. So we can't ever have a situation where Druid companions can be like the same level as Necro minions, because that's the fantasy. Yep. So I remember watching that live, and I was like, they're literally point blank saying that they're going to drive companion Druid to mediocrity because Necros exist in the game, which is obviously a philosophy I strongly disagree with. So I agree with Woody that I would love to see it would be a super fun build, and I hope we get it, but it's going to require an internal paradigm shift, because they literally said in one of the dev things that companion Druid is not going to be better than minion Necro, and we'll see how it goes this season. We'll see how good minion Necro is, but so far minion Necro hasn't been top tier at all, so that's bad placement on the hierarchy.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Something that's really funny with that is like the lead class designer, Adam Jackson, right? He went out and said that the design, because a lot of people complained about the efficiency of minions for Necromancer already early on. And the statement that was made by Adam Jackson was that they had 3 core fantasies in mind for the Necromancer. It was blood, bone, and shadow. That's it. No minions. Blood, bone, and shadow. And the reference to minions was that since necromancers are thematically and historically the minion class in the franchise, they're in a position where they added so that you can play any of these 3 core fantasies, and then you can choose whether or not you're going to have with minions or without minions, and then they would have pros and cons for either decision. But nowhere in the statements that they made were minion necromancers a 4th actual fantasy that you should be able to engage with, to exclusively have as a build, which I think is why minion builds early on was where you focus exclusively on minions were kind of lackluster. You kind of had to have that extra core skill, like Bone Spear or Blight or whatever you chose to run with, had to be there to support the minion build, so to say, to create this well-rounded beast, if you will. And that seems to have changed with the Season 2 changes. They're making it quite significant changes across the board for minions, like the skirmishers, the defenders, as well as all 3 golem types are now getting increased damage sources besides the paragon changes, to seemingly make it so that this 4th fantasy is now something that they're actually focusing on doing, which didn't seem to be within the scope of what they were doing, aiming for. So yeah, I absolutely agree that they did take the decision and say, well, we're not going to make that because Necromancer exists. But I definitely think that the minions for Necro got the attention now thanks to popular demand, and that's not saying that can't happen with the Druids.
Yeah, I can definitely see the point that you're making. And I think this is something that's also just like natural and expected. Like, just look at the glyphs they introduced this season, right? They're like trying to make like Dust Devils and Leapquake a thing, and these kind of like very niche archetypes basically that are like procs of other effects and whatnot. And it just like expands the arsenal of tools that we have to make a build, right? Either creating its own build like Leapquake, that could potentially be like actually it is kind of a build, right? It's just not a very good one, but it gets a nice bump up, right? And eventually it might be like a really nice build, right? And similar to those minions, and there's also like some stuff, for example, for Rogue with grenades, right? They made like a grenade based glyph that buffs the damage of your grenade skills, but there's only one grenade skill in the game, which actually doesn't do any damage at all. So it only buffs like some grenades that you can trigger that do nothing basically on other effects. But we're at least moving in that direction of, let's say expansion 1, right? I can guarantee they're going to introduce like a core skill that is a grenade on Rogue. Like, I can guarantee that. Like, they're moving in that direction, right? Where like they're gonna introduce more stuff over time and expand build options, simply because, yeah, this is where the direction that these games go, right? And eventually you have like 10, 15 builds per class or whatever, and at some point it's like kind of like saturated, I guess, and then more like need to look into like maybe like changing fundamental things like how they did in this patch with crit and bone changes, or so, like maybe adding like yet another like damage scaling mechanism, so to say, for example. But yeah, in general, I think this is just the way to go to like make more builds viable, and this is what they're trying to do, and that's a really good move, right? They're kind of like thinking about their original decision. Minions are just support, and now it's actually a thing, right? Or it's getting a thing. And same might happen with companions as well. So you might see exactly that also happen with Druids next season, for example.
Very possible.
Lord, please, because Ravens are down so bad. I literally forgot it was a skill even in the game. When it showed up in the patch notes, I was like, Ravens. Oh, Ravens. Yeah, you can have those. I've literally never even seen someone use them. I'm not sure I've ever seen the animation.
I was told that there is one individual that we know of that has cleared a Nightmare Dungeon tier 100 with a companion druid build. So apparently it does work, at least for one Giga Chat individual. But yeah, it just feels really
there's
bad.
no time limits, huh?
Yeah, there's that. I mean, the Nightmare Dungeons have been made a lot easier now as well compared to before. But I mean, yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm definitely with Rex on the idea that they've literally said they're not going to do it because Necromancer exists. It just feels so weird. I mean, why? But on that topic, moving to annual expansion, maybe new core skills. I think that's definitely needed to create more diversity on the things that do exist. But I think that I'm not sure what you guys agree with this, but I'm expecting them to, on their first annual expansion, to warrant there being a cost associated to it. I feel like adding new bigger stones, new content, bosses isn't going to necessarily be enough to warrant the cost of an expansion, but a new class would. And I think like they already have assets from their other Arsenal games. I mean, we have Diablo Immortal, for example. Hopefully that dies soon enough with a pay-to-win ship, but that's a different topic. The vampire stuffs, which we're also seeing some vampire stuffs in the season 2 now. But what happens if they introduce a Blood Knight? Or we still have classes from the franchise that we're not seeing yet. I mean, Amazon, Paladin. There's so many things that they can still reintroduce and bring into the franchise in the form of annual expansions. Do you guys think that we're going to see a new class in the expansion?
I think that's a given. That's like, there's no chance you're not going to see an expansion that brings a new class, I believe. So the thing is that what can they introduce, right? This is like the next big topic. That's the big question that everyone is thinking, like, okay, what are they going to introduce in the expansion? Rather, it's a question, not if they will do it, I think.
Definitely in that same boat. You guys agree as well, DM?
Yeah, I think the odds are fairly good. Shake the 8 ball. It's going to say the odds are good. Then you're probably going to see a new class. I doubt it's the Blood Knight. I would think if they were going to do a Blood Knight, Season of Blood probably would have been saved thematically for a Blood Knight release. Fair. And they probably would have done the Immortal Blood Knight like sooner to the D4 one and done like a cross promotion or something. They seem to really like those. So I doubt it's a Blood Knight. I would think it's probably like a holy or unholy class if I had to guess. There's a lot of religious themes in the game. Obviously, it's Diablo. So I would assume some kind of like priest something class. There was a leak a while back. I don't know if it was necessarily a leak, but it was hints where they showed the different merch that you could buy. And they said like the classes are on the cups, but one of them had like the Lilith icon and the other 5 of them were the other 5 classes, and there was some speculation that means that it's going to be a Lilith supporter, there will be the 6 class, etc., and we never actually got that. So I would say the odds are good, but who knows what the class is actually going to be. My guess is an unholy or holy type of class.
Which classes do they... Sorry, go ahead.
A long time ago, before Diablo 4 came out, there was a leak, maybe a year early or something, on Reddit, where a guy said he was a member of Blizzard and he said he was going to tell you everything about Diablo 4. And like 95% of his post was just dead on. He said that it was open world. He said there would be mounts, and he listed the 5 starting classes or whatever. And Necromancer was not one of the starting classes. And the other starting class that he listed was Paladin. So the thought and the accuracy of this post was pretty crazily good. Like, it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty much everything that they released with that difference. So I think Paladin, with that, if that comes up to be true, Paladin has been done for a long time, and I think that will be released. And like, I don't know, however long it was ago, 30 minutes ago, when Woody described what he would expect from an expansion, like an extension of the game, like extending the campaign, 1 new class, whatever, 2 new zones, a new end game thing, blah, blah, blah. I would say that would be the bare minimum of what the general public is expecting from this expansion. So I think if they do exactly what he said, that will be enough for some people. But that would be like my base. Like, that would be the baseline of what they would need to do in this expansion. So if they didn't have a new character, I don't think people would pay for it.
Yeah, I'm in that boat as well. I like the idea of the Paladin, but I mean, what classes do we have in the franchise that we don't have in D4? I mean, we have the Blood Knight, we have the Monk, we have Paladin, the Amazon, right? What else do we have? What am I missing?
Assassin is also there.
Assassin.
I mean, the thing is that there's like a lot of like either thematic or like mechanical overlap with some of these classes, right? Like the Rogue. I mean, first of all, it's a Diablo 1 Rogue, I guess, but it's like not really, right? They made like a completely revamp of that, but technically that existed. But then again, like, I think the Rogue, for example, would already kill like the real design space for like an assassin. And, similar, like, I think in Diablo 1, he had like a warrior or something, right? It wasn't called Barbarian. So
Yeah.
that's not going to be a thing because Barbarian exists, I guess. And there's not really that many like niches basically, especially if you don't want to like overload the game with a lot of classes, right? The PoE 2 like just releases like all the classes, but realistically, I think Diablo 4 is gonna, like, even after many expansions, it's not gonna go beyond like 8 classes. I think that's probably like kind of like the healthy maximum, I would say. At least at the size of the game, and like we're gonna have like hundreds of legendary aspects for every single of them. We're gonna eventually have hundreds of uniques for every single one of them, right?
Oh.
There's like this long tail of stuff that they like load onto themselves for future releases and for future seasons that they have to take care of after introducing a new class, right? It's just like unsustainable to implement too many classes. So I have to think very carefully about which niches to fill. And in that case, I think the most obvious is probably like a holy class, either a melee like a paladin or like a caster. Realistically, I would prefer a caster, honestly, because this game is already very melee heavy.
I'm kind of with you on that as well. I mean, like you mentioned, like thematically, the rogue kind of fills the Amazon assassin roles, and maybe I guess to some degree the demon hunter from D3, for example. And I mean, Sork, you got like the wizard, for example, is another class. You mentioned warrior from D1 is kind of like a high, like a bar paladin. You have that kind of approach already. Same thing when you talk about blood knights and crusaders. Like
There's
they all
also Witch Doctor.
Witch Doctor, correct? So I mean, there's definitely different kinds of approaches to it. I think that they're definitely going to be giving us new classes, but like we all agree on that. But there is obviously the problem that brings is, like you mentioned, I don't think they will go to, like you said, having too many classes. But then again, they also have the approach of choosing your archetype within your class. Say you're playing a sorcerer, for example. Maybe you can, say necromancer. You can have the old school OG necromancer approach, but you can also start, specializing yourself by, hey, I'm going to head into a witch doctor branch of the skill twig, and suddenly the skill twig is now a skill bush instead. It's a little bit more to it, and giving us some diversity. So there's that option as well, without requiring to introduce new unique specifically for the classes and all those problems that would be there, by allowing archetypes within the classes as well, similar to like ascendancies in PoE for the classes. Like you have one class can go into 3 different branches. And something that's really important to point out, like a lot of people are saying, oh, they should just steal that, or they did steal that from that game and whatnot. Like, we're at a point of the gaming industry where reinventing the wheel is not always a good thing to do, and taking inspiration from other games is something that should be done and is being done consistently. I mean, we see that with previous content releases and seasonal content, or leagues for PoE, for example, are taking something from the league we're in right now in PoE. They took inspiration from an auto battler, which we see in TFT and Dota battle chess and stuff like that, and implemented that as a ARPG theme or approach to the game. So I think that those things would be really good, that game companies take inspirations from other game companies. So having these archetype things in Diablo could be taken from the idea of ascendancies from PoE, for example, to avoid bloating the quantity of classes and the problems that would bring to the table as well. I'm very excited, though, to see new classes in the game, and I definitely agree that it is very melee heavy. But what they're going to do, it's impossible to tell. Did that document you mentioned, Rax, did they talk about any other classes that we haven't seen yet? Or that was it?
No, they didn't mention anything else. That was the main thing. They said Paladin was one of the starting 5, and then they pulled it for Necro. So I'm guessing if they would have ever internally landed on it being a starting 5, it would have probably meant that they did lots and lots of development on it. So I doubt that they entirely scrapped it. I'll tell you something that I'm not really sure that Diablo 4 has. I really can't think of it, that I think would be a good archetype. Like, I don't know, like what kind of a class you would make. Maybe you'd call it like a warlock or something. But like in World of Warcraft, for example, you have like the warlock and the shadow priest that run around and like dot everything, and they're really masters of like manipulating the monsters. And like priests have like mind control, and you can mind control the monsters. I think there's so many. I think that's a really like still an untapped thing in ARPGs. I really wish there would be a class where instead of just walking up and doing direct damage, swing your sword, shoot your arrow, throw a fireball, more just like manipulation of the situation, I think would give If they could do that very well, I think that would be so fun to play. So I hope that something like the Mesmer in Guild Wars 1 or the Shadow Priest
That's
in
a good
WoW,
call
something
out.
like that.
You know, when you
The
say that,
cultist, man.
I keep thinking about, like I mentioned, that reinventing the wheel, but because it's very hard, right, to introduce like these new ways of playing something that has been a genre or everyone's expecting a certain way of playing it. Like I don't think Diablo 4 would be as big if they didn't have Necromancer as a base class. Because I know for a fact that I'd be discouraged from playing Diablo 4 if there wasn't a Necromancer class myself. Maybe I'm biased. But a game recently that we all have played that has done something that is, groundbreaking in the design of the playstyle is actually Last Epoch. The introduction of the Rune Master is taken as an inspiration of having a class, a hero in the game Dota, the Invoker, where you had these different combination spells would allow your invocation spell to become different spells. And that was like, that sounded so daunting when I first heard about it. I was like, that's not going to end well. And they have done a really good job. And that's turned into, from my perspective, one of the most enjoyable non-minion classes that I've ever played in Last Epoch. That's such a cool way to do it. So when you're talking about this, manipulative approach of gameplay, that's not something you see in ARPGs. And that if you can do that in a cool way, suddenly the game is not just any other ARPG. It's a game that offers something more than what exists in the current genre. I really like that take.
Yeah, I also agree with that. You have to like kind of like add something to the game that's not already there, right? If you just want to like whack monsters with your melee skill, then you can play Barb or Rogue or something, right? And if you want to cast and you throw a fireball or you throw some holy bolt, I mean, what's really the difference, right? I mean, there's some flavor attached to that, but realistically, it would definitely be nicer to extend the actual arsenal of the game, right? With like some manipulation stuff that Rax described, or also this Invoker stuff. Actually, a fun fact: Invoker is actually my favorite hero, and I have like the most fond memories of playing Invoker of Dota like 15 years ago. So I actually really like that concept as well to remaster. I didn't get to try it yet lately when I played Last Epoch, but yeah, that's definitely something I'm looking forward to as well. I think one thing to really keep in mind though is that if you make a new class like this, and you can introduce some fancy stuff like that, but it needs to be, it needs to not necessarily be like the core of the class. So you still need to have your typical whack a monster or cast your fireball kind of playstyle as well, because a lot of the more casual players, I think they will just not like a class like overall if this is like a thing that is like a theme that is always there and always present, and it's like too special basically. Most people just want to go log in and like blast basically, right? And if it's like too out of the ordinary, I think that might also really fail very easily. So it's hard to find a balance there. I think something like Witch Doctor would be, for example, a really good fit for Diablo 4 if you go in that direction, where I think first of all thematically it fits really well. You could have some stuff with minions, could have some stuff with manipulation, could have some stuff with those like plane casting, and there could be dots, there could be direct damage. So there is like a bit of everything that it could actually fit into like a Witch Doctor class, for example. And with the pace of Diablo 4, it would also just it would really suit the game, I think. So that might be another option for a new class.
I think the Witch Doctor would be a great opportunity to weave in what Rax was talking about. It would allow them to have a different type of minion archetype. It would allow them to have, these warlock type abilities as well as manipulative stuffs. And it would also, again, add another range class to an already melee heavy thematic that the game is running by. I like the idea, but I'm definitely on board with the thing that I'm definitely expecting a paladin to be the next class they're going to introduce first when it comes to new classes. That's the boat I'm sitting in.
The chat is also like making some funny suggestions. Like, what about a battle mage wielding a shield and a sword, or a totem thing class? That's that could be also like, imagine like a shaman from WoW or something. Like he's just 40 totems everywhere.
Yeah.
If they brought the enhancement or elemental shaman into Diablo 4, I would only play that. I would play that all day long, and I wouldn't play anything else. I would just be shaman all the time.
That would be badass for sure. Something like an enhancement shaman, man.
Shaman would kind of fit too.
Wind Fury. Imagine Wind Furying Durio with your Kang the Decapitator.
That would be so cool.
Now we're going real old school, man.
Speaking of WoW, though, I was so surprised. Like, I'm not sure if any of you guys are still playing. I don't play retail, but I do play classic. It's my little toxic bad habits. And this Thursday they released Icecrown Citadel in Wrath of Lich King Classic. Still have, I guess, good time. We haven't killed Lich King yet. Going to, I hope. What's really crazy to me is that they decided to launch Diablo 4 Season 2 on a Tuesday. Now, that normally wouldn't have been a problem for me since I live in Sweden, but I do raid with 24 other Americans. So I raid on the East Coast servers. They have weekly resets on Tuesdays. And I believe that's the same in retail, if I'm not mistaken, which means that they're releasing Diablo 4 Season 2 on the same day. They have raid resets in both WoW Classic and WoW at the same time as the week before they release a new raid tier. It's just...
I got good news for you, Ghazzy. I don't think they're going to do that anymore. It's the feedback's been left. I think they did it so they could have the developers ready in case something went wrong. I agree with you. It's like really bad timing. People don't want to blast on a Tuesday. They want to go on a Friday. I think it's especially with Season 3. Season 3 is the leaderboards, right? You can't start a race on a Tuesday. So I think it's changing. They're going to change it.
I really hope so, because it's like alienating their own metaverse that they've been pushing for decades. Like, why? It made no sense.
I think they did it so they could have people on deck to fix it.
Yeah, I agree with Rax, and I also don't think that the point that you're making, Ghazzy, is really important to them, to be honest. I don't think they care that some raiders won't be able to start a season on the same day or something like that. I think, okay, they have cross, pollination between the games or something, but not to that degree where they would think that someone is like so try hard and sweaty that they have to start exactly on the hour and not 5 hours later. So I think it's just not an issue. But in general, like with leaderboards, I totally agree with Rax. I also gave the same feedback to them as well. Like I was just like, guys, like I don't even care what week it starts, right? But if we do a future season releases with leaderboards, it can't be a Tuesday,
It'll be streamer heaven on the leaderboards. That's for damn sure. That and the people, that doesn't have a job.
It's just terrible though. Like, even I don't want that. So, it just sucks, and I can't imagine it's gonna be that hard to like either prepare the patch well enough that they don't need like 20 people in the office on release, or just have like a few guys for like a day in the weekend, right? I mean that should be manageable somehow, I imagine.
I would rather see them not make major changes during the first few days of a race, because that's something that I was really upset about during the game launch, Season 0, because I was part of the handful of people that were racing, and we were catching up to Rob, playing softcore, sorry boys. So we're doing that. We were catching up. Like we had a good line of pumping, and people did the whole grinding out the dungeon, right, and resetting it. But there were 2 top tier dungeons. And one was where Rob was playing, and the other one my group was playing, because our group composition couldn't do the other one, but we had a better XP per hour in the other one. And all of a sudden, there's a patch comes in that ruins the place that we were in, but left the one untouched. And that just destroyed the race for me. I was like, there is no way we can catch up now. And our entire group felt the same way. So we started like kind of chilling for a few hours and just like, what do we do now? Because I mean, there's no way we can win now, because they literally made a change that was so impactful on the race sequence mid-race. It was so awkward. So I'd rather see them launch the game and let the race finish before they make changes. So if that means fewer people just there to bug fix and whatnot during the weekend, I'd love that. And then they can fix shit on Monday, Tuesday. I'd rather see that than what happened in Season 0. Did you guys have any impact of that at all in the hardcore area?
For me, it was an impact because I think they massively nerfed glyphs like day 2 or something. I think that was something like that, where I had to like adjust my build, and like I was doing like a strategy where I was like playing solo, so I wasn't doing this like normal dungeon grind, and people were skipping glyphs altogether and stuff like that. Or they buffed glyphs, I think. Sorry, they did something with glyphs, but I was farming a lot of nightmare dungeons, and I remember that I had like this massive advantage of having glyphs versus everyone else not having glyphs, because they were all farming this like split farming, Champion's Demise and stuff like that. And then they did something there, and that was like massively weaker. So that was kind of like how I was affected by that. I mean, in the end, it worked out anyway, but it was kind of like, yeah, I kind of agree that, like some massive changes like day 2 or something. I mean, unless something is like really broken to the point where, like you're running around at 500 miles an hour and one-shotting the entire screen, kind of thing, right? With like, billions of damage or whatever, then I think it's fine. Just like, let it be for a little while and like, let people finish it. It depends a bit. Like if you're talking about like a farming meta, like, okay, this whole like split farming thing that has been left in the game now for months, actually, I think should not even exist. I think from my perspective, it doesn't even promote group play, right? You just go in together and then you split up and go part your ways. And it's just like 3 times faster than solo play for no reason. So that being a thing at all is something that I think should have been patched out. And this would be a reason to do a hot fix. But for some reason, they never did that. So that is like
it's also not fun.
questionable. Yeah, exactly. It's not fun. It's not promoting group play. It's like, I don't know what exactly they're thinking with keeping that in the game, but I think inevitably at some point it needs to go. So yeah, it's just that this would be a case where I think, okay, you have to start early, you have to fix this early so that people don't get accustomed to this and, kind of like believe that this is how the game is supposed to be played. And then at some point, 3 months later, you're going to nerf it. And, now everyone's like, oh, what the hell? Why did you nerf this, right? Even though it was never intended, for example. I mean, they have not specifically stated this, I think, for group farming, but, for other cases they have, but people don't necessarily know that.
I don't like things in games where it feels like the best min-max strategy is something that will make me quit the game the soonest. It's like, yes, maybe technically there's some skill or some group communication behind actually getting your maximum XP, and sure, having a meta, you should be able to like extract the most experience if you're good. Yeah, I agree with all those points, but fundamentally, like funneling people through it, especially at the start of the game when it was all hype, funneling through people through this part of the game that is like a menu simulator for half the game is so boring to play. It's boring to watch. The first week of the game was when I hated the game the most. When everyone was just sitting there just grinding the same dungeon over and over again, I was like, this is more boring than Diablo 3 Grave Rifts. Like it was the most boring thing in the world to me. So I don't even mind. Just nerf it for everybody. Get rid of it. Get rid of this concept of this super annoying menu simulator, and I'm totally fine with it. Just because I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's fun to watch. I don't think it's fun to play, and it's also just it doesn't seem like a very rewarding part of the game. It's the worst part of the game we're forcing people through, basically.
I definitely agree. Like the part for me that made spamming one dungeon fun for me was the racing aspect of it, and as soon as that was taken away from me, it was just dreadful going into that place again. I was like, the only reason I was doing this was because of this, and now that goal is now stripped away from me. I don't want to do this again. And I'm definitely on the same page there. There were some changes in the patch notes regarding NMDs, but there were no changes regarding resetting the dungeons, because one of the most effective ways of leveling during Season 1 was to have a Nightmare Dungeon of significantly higher tier that you were able to blast through fast, preferably with Magic 5, but most importantly, Nightmare Portals affix on it, on an effective dungeon with the most experience. Thank you for that list, by the way, Rax. With the list of most experience per hour during the best dungeon for that. And once you got that sweet spot, you ran it, but before you finished the boss, you would give the leader to someone else, and that person would then be prompted to join that person's world tiers, shard, phase, whatever. Just decline it. Pass the leadership back. Once you kill the boss, those people could leave the party, and that Nightmare Dungeon would be reset and available in their zone. They would then just reinvite everybody, you go again. That's not fixed. So Season 2 will have the possibility, unless they make a change, which I doubt they will have that possibility combined with a multiplicative experience scaling for playing in a party, which doubles down on what Woody was saying earlier with you playing in a party is just so much stronger in terms of not necessarily rewards, but experience. And you can level so much faster because of this. And you don't really have to change the way you do it, because you can literally sit in the same Nightmare Dungeon all the way through if you want to. And that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the thing that they said that they didn't want to do in Diablo 4. First of all, the first part of it, it's just an exploit, and the fact that that wasn't prioritized being fixed, I get it. Only the top 1% people do it. Okay, a lot of people don't know about it. It doesn't really impact it because there's no leaderboards. But it's also just an exploit that a lot of people are just doing all the time. And it can't. I would imagine, I'm not a game dev, but that can't be that hard to fix. So if that's still not fixed in season 2, then the groups are just going to absolutely obliterate the solo players. One thing that happened in Diablo 3 is Diablo 3 is so unfair toward group play and solo. It's literally in a different galaxy. And they have said multiple times, going back from the first BlizzCon where they announced it and every single thing up to it, they said that in Diablo 4, it was a core principle of theirs to bridge the gap between solo and group. I would say currently it is still, it's better than it was in Diablo 3, I guess, but I still don't think it's anywhere near where it needs to be. Groups just completely decimate solo players, and it's just not a good feeling because I think most people play solo. I'm perfectly fine with incentivizing group play. You should want to log in on a Friday with your buddies and get on Discord and blast. Like, I love that, and if you want to be incentivized to do so, I'm genuinely fine with that. But the magnitude of the difference that has been built in to these games, I think, is just straight up unfair to the solo people.
That's fair. I do have to correct myself. Chat was all over me. Apparently, August 8th, patch 1.2 or 1.1.2 or whatever it was, they did fix the resetting with a party leaving, like I mentioned. So that actually doesn't exist anymore. So.
Okay, thank God. That should have been fixed instantly. It's just an exploit.
Yes,
I mean,
for sure.
yeah, that is definitely something that needed to be fixed. I wasn't also really aware if that was fixed or not, but good to hear that. I mean, it doesn't really change the fact that groups are just like ridiculously more powerful than solo players, right? And then sometimes people say like, "Oh, just add SSF mode and everything will be fine." Well, I think this is like a too short-sighted argument, in my opinion, because it's much more than that. It's just like, okay, you choose to play solo, yeah. Or some people don't even choose that. Some people just play solo, but you choose to play solo, and you just see that other people that choose to group up are just like 2 times, 3 times faster than you. And even if I have this SSF tag, it will just feel bad. It will just feel like, why does it have to be such a gap, right? Like, it doesn't need to be such a large gap, and it can't be that hard to balance the game to be like somewhere in the same ballpark, right? 50% more, maybe double. Even that are like ridiculous numbers in terms of balancing, in my opinion, that it can't be that hard to kind of hit that mark. But the way that what we have in Diablo 4, I actually disagree with Rex there. I think Diablo 4's group versus solo balance is way worse than Diablo 3's balance. Like Diablo 3, okay, it was really bad in the past, but in the last like few years, I think it has definitely gotten a lot closer, like solo versus group, in terms of like how much XP you can farm and the gems you can level and all that stuff. It has improved to the point where I think it doesn't really, it doesn't make me feel terrible at playing solo. But in D4, I'm like a solo enjoyer, and so are many other people. And I think that not just making SSF mode is not enough. There needs to be some actual tweaks, like this, this group farming where you split up, for example. I think that's kind of like the root of all evil here, where if that was fixed, if there was like some reasonable like maximum range on XP sharing, for example, or something like that, I think we'd be looking at a much healthier game and a much healthier community overall. And it's a very simple fix, in my opinion.
I remember last Epoch made a statement about their plans for trade, and their system there, without going too in depth on it, was faction based. You could choose to align with a certain faction that would allow you to trade with people, or you could choose to align yourself with another faction that would not allow you to trade those items, but you would then get an increased percent drop rate. Would it make sense if the idea would, for example, as a suggestion, be that if you're solo self-found tagged, you can't change away from the solo self-found, but what you're instead getting, the perk of being solo self-found strictly is that you have an increased experience gain, but you only get experience for monsters that you kill or participate killing, and you also have a slight increase in drop rate. Because that would incentivize more people to do it, but it would also kind of alleviate the differences between blasting group play versus solo play. But at the same time, the problem would also then be that you're going through the game faster, which is already being buffed. But what's your take on it? I guess Woody's the only one who plays solo self. I'm not sure how you do that, Rax.
I play solo.
You do as well, yeah.
So yeah, so to marry the two ideas between what Woody said and Ghazzy, I step back. So I agree with what Woody said. I don't think adding SSF is enough of a problem solve. And so I try to back up and I say, all right, what is the problem being generated here by group play being so much better than solo? Well, anybody who consumes any amount of content when they're playing solo, when they realize the discrepancy of groups, they're going to sit there and they're going to feel bad, and then they're going to ask themselves something like, well, if I want to get to the get to the forefront of the content quickly, I've got to find a teammate somehow. And that could bring up a bunch of other problems. Maybe people can't find friends to play with. Maybe people just don't want to play groups, but they feel forced to do it. So I think a system like that that rewards you for playing solo in a way would help. There's probably a lot of ways that might not be the only way to fix it. One inherent thing about ARPGs, like forget every buff, forget every XP multiplier. Almost always in an ARPG, when you group up, you just naturally become more efficient. If you have any synergy at all, assuming equal skill levels and some synergy of the builds, it usually only makes things easier based upon how the developers tweak the difficulty of adding additional players to the game. It's usually beneficial to group up in practically every ARPG. So adding these extra benefits for grouping, adding a lot of them, it starts to add up so fast that they don't become comparable quickly.
Another core fundamental issue with grouping in the game is outside of just the benefits of it, there isn't like any social aspects to the game. It's an overworld game with a clan in it, but there's not really anything to do with the social systems are quite bad. I feel like if we're going to make all of the grouping good and it's going to remain good, then at least build out the fundamental parts of the clan or have other stuff to do together. Like if we're going to make it good, as opposed to just having, oh, well, it's min-maxy if you just want to be as efficient as possible. Or, nerf it down and then it's a solo game. But like we have to kind of like double down and pick one. I feel it's kind of in the middle of like, yeah, you can be faster in a group, but there's not really any reason outside of just the min-max efficiency to ever do anything in a group or have a friends list at all. So it would be kind of cool to see like a clan system get built out, or maybe events for clans. Maybe you can all like summon a world boss together that has bonus loot. Like, even in more of those got some clan related things to do together. I think that'd be kind of cool. And then you build a community and then you make some friends in your clans. And now we're incentivizing real actual organic group play as compared to like, let me go on the board, find a guy who's super into min-maxing, get him to be my partner so we can grind 5% faster. Like it'd be cool to have it kind of like organically happen for the average guy.
I like that idea. I keep reverting and making reference to PoE since I've played it for a decade now. And it's like, they have guilds in PoE as well, yet nothing's ever been done with it. It's just so dull. Like there's nothing to it. And it just makes it kind of feel awkward. So you have your little in-house community just to have another chat channel to communicate with. And that's it. And double the idea with PoE is an ARPG, but D4 is by default designed to be an MMO ARPG. Like you're supposed to have this world where you encounter people. Not too many. That's also something they said. They didn't wanted the place to feel hollow and you're left alone kind of a feeling to it. But every now and then you're going to encounter people. In town you might see some more. That was the whole idea with it. So having features to weave in the idea of the social aspect, and that kind of makes me feel go back to reminiscent about the past when it comes to World of Warcraft times or the early days. Like when we went to school, when you took the bus to school, you sit next to your friends and the only thing you would talk about was WoW. You got to school, you're on a break. Only thing you talked about was WoW. During class, the only thing you would talk about was not the school stuff, it was WoW. And, that's what we did, right? We've all been there. And, that when we came home to start playing, we met our friends and we talked about it. We did things together. And that was like the fun part of it, building that social aspect around it. And they could bring that back by not having to, too much effort into doing something like that. Like you mentioned, like an event, maybe in a weekend on a Saturday or Sunday, there would be like an event where you where you can go together and do this as a community or whatever, that's enough to emphasize the social structure of it and make people that doesn't have a guild seek out those things and do things together, make friends, and that will also increase the enjoyment and the retention and the longevity of the gameplay for a lot of people as well. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to reach that point.
Yeah, I think it's like really hard to strike a right balance there though, because Rax said that earlier, like, you know, they are really focused on like adding content that both solo and group can do. And if you make like exclusive clan stuff, it can't be like too impactful at the very least, right? Summoning like a world boss and, you know, this kind of stuff. I mean, that's okay. You know, that could even be like some kind of like challenge where maybe there's like multiple tiers of that, and it's just, it doesn't even have to drop loot necessarily, right? You can just like, you know, maybe just, you know, do like a little clan activity, and then they can like show off, okay, our clan with like 8 people of the clan or something, or 12 people, you know, we have beaten, you know, a tier 5 Ashava or something like that, right? And maybe next time you're gonna try the tier 6 or so, right? And that could even be something already. Or at very least, like, okay, Helltide starts popping up, and, you know, like everyone is heading to Helltide, and now there could be like maybe some, like literally a button, like, you know, you open a clan interface and there's like a button like join Helltide group or something like that, and then it just automatically groups up with people that are in the Helltide area or something like that, right? This could be like quite simple like that as well, just to like, you know, not necessarily give like a big advantage for doing that, but it's just like, yeah, it's like the social feeling that you get, right? And you actually like get to talk to people maybe here and there. Maybe, you know, you're gonna try to, you know, make a little strategy, or it's gonna, you know, have fun playing with the same people. So there could be stuff like that, but the social systems in game, I agree with the M, are atrocious for that. It's also the, at least part of the reason why I have not really tried anything in groups in D4. Like, I've been mostly just playing solo. I've done like 3 Nightmare Dungeons with Scissoran at some point, and that was basically about it for my group play. And then like some stuff I did with Rax, but yeah.
Fair
I
enough.
like Legion for this reason. Like when you actually show, it's sort of like what you're mentioning. You show up to Legion, there's a big group of people, you get the low XP from the campfire, whatever you can do, you get a little minor bonus. But I actually feel like, okay, there's a group of us like fighting a horde of minions. I wish they would just double down on the Legion event and make it like 5 times as many minions. Just swarm them in there. Even if you make 10 times as many minions, but you get 10 times less experience, like so it evens out, it's fine. I just think it would be cool thematically to have, we have a big open world, big map to work with, lots of players in the space at a given time. Let's do a huge horde of minions. You know what I mean? It would be really cool. It doesn't feel like it would even be that hard to implement. You just crank some dot, make the rewards the same. I'll do it because it's fun. You know, it doesn't even have to necessarily be something where it's the most rewarding in the game, but like a big group of players that all group up to deal with like a big dark portal that opens up and dumps out some big ass minions. That'd be pretty cool. Give me a couple of those.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like they could expand the events to be wider and be more, you know, larger areas, more people get involved and whatnot. It would feel like you're being swarmed and whatnot. It's also kind of funny, like with like the when it comes to that kind of content, we still haven't seen anything about Cal levels. Like that's also kind of crazy. But before we go into any other topic, I do want to finish off the patch note changes when it comes to the classes before I forget, because there's again people asking about the barb, what our thoughts are on the barb. You can start with you, Dio, just to get rid of that so people are satisfied. What do you
Don't
think
ask
about
me,
it?
Barb, bro. I'm a clueless individual when it comes to Barb. I haven't really even played. It's the class that I've played the absolute least out of all of them. So I'm gonna pass it right along.
You're
the
a
nose,
smart
someone
guy,
knows what
DM.
they're talking about.
Same here. So who of you two have done played barb a lot? Because I have not touched it. I'm a DM on this.
I'm gonna let Rax go first. I've played some bar, but let's see. Rax
I
probably more.
used to be the Barb writer from Maxwell once upon a time. Oh, Barb! I remember
then
the
came
good
the
old
nerfs.
glory. I remember the glory days of Barb, where we had 1 day of supreme power, and it's never been the same. Barbs are moving up. There's nowhere to move but up when you're the worst. Again, the bleed, the overpower, the fortify stuff helps. I think I don't think you got much of a choice. You have to, in the end game, you've got to go with some kind of a bleed build. You got to go like whirlwind bleed or rend rupture or something. It's probably going to be pretty strong once you build everything. Barb leveling is still pretty much a catastrophe. It's not worse than Druid. I think Druids are worse. But one thing that actually really helps Barbs in leveling is the buffs to upheaval. Upheaval, I think, is pretty significantly their best leveling ability. There was actually one point in time in my hardcore speedrunning things to 40 where I actually had a better time to level 20 on Barb than I did as my Sorcerer. So now upheaval is only stronger, and that's just throwing just vanilla upheaval with no buffs. So the sad thing for me about barbs is in the betas and in the alphas, the upheaval barb was the absolute ruler of the universe, and upheaval was kind of like the new ability kind of that they were bringing into Diablo 4 that Diablo 3 didn't have. They had everything else. They had like rend and double swing and Hoda and all that stuff. We had seen all that before in Diablo 3 and 2, but upheaval was a pretty new thing, and it finally had some range. And I think their decision just to nerf the living shit out of that because it was so good in the beta right before the launch was still so bad. And so now they're actually reverting some of it, and now they're buffing Hellhammer to still a pale shadow of what it used to be. It's just too bad because Barb is my favorite class. Barb is the class that I would like to play. Tempted to start Barb actually anyway, but I still think that if you don't go like a bleed build, I think it's going to be pretty rough. I think you just got to be a meme lord and just put on the frenzy with the healing thing and the mega attack speed and try to just tank Duriel the whole time.
Yeah, so my take is, I think barbs are definitely moving up, just as Rax said. I think they are in a much better spot than they were last patch, especially the multiplicative nature of berserking damage now is going to be good. Personally, I'm really pumped to play upheaval myself. I really like upheaval. I played one build a lot on Barb. That was the Walking Arsenal Barb, the Kratos Barb. That was like a thing that I played. That was really fun, and it just keeps getting better as well. It was kind of like a solid build already, and it's just got like 5 separate buffs over the last 3 months. So I think that's going to be in a good spot at least. And now we have like a bunch of other stuff like upheaval. I guess Hoda is still around. Rend is there. I think Barb is going to be an overall fine class, especially because it's very, very tanky. Especially if we consider that like basically all classes are going to have like the same like armor and res like baseline. Barbs just have like, you know, the extra thing on top. You know, they have their passes for damage reduction. They have their extra life. They have their challenging shout if you want. There's a bunch of really good defensive abilities on Barb that make it like a really like easy class to play. I think Barbarian is going to be probably the easiest class next patch. It's not necessarily the strongest, but it's going to be the easiest, and I think that has a lot of things going for it. And that's probably like also how it should be, in my opinion. You know, this is kind of like what Barb is made for. It's just like, you know, a simple class. You press a button, stuff dies, and I think that's exactly how it's going to work for most builds. So it's looks like it's going to be pretty solid.
That's fair. That's fair. Another thing that we haven't really touched upon a lot is like when we talked about different things to do in the game and aspirational content and whatnot. Like I have a kind of a specific take on this topic, but its topic is PvP, and I would like to hear your thoughts on the PvP because it's like there's been a lot of pressure from the community praising how PvP was in D2 and how they have to have this in D4. It's going to be so cool. And I just feel like PvP in D4 feels exactly like it did in D2. And, you know, I might be remembering this in a completely wrong way, but PvP in D2 was 3 things happening. You chase people down to one-shot them, or you got one-shot. Or you poured it in, found where they were, then you randomly died because there was a desynced hammered in the other side of the area that just had an invisible hammer that hit you. Or you had 2 barbarians spinning at each other, and 16 hours later, one of them either accidentally died or just quit the game because it got boring. Like that's my memory of D2 PvP, and people praise this. So I want to hear you guys' thoughts on PvP. We can start with you, DM.
All right. Well, I play a little bit of D2, but I wasn't a PvP enjoyer. I'll say that D4, there's only one of 2 things that happen, which is I see somebody and I instantly kill them, or they see me and I instantly die. It seems like that's more or less has been my experience. Now, I only played it in the start, and I didn't feel any reason to go back there because I didn't feel like there was any rewards I really cared about other than monster density there. And I don't like the idea that if I want to kill PvE mobs, let me go to the PvP zone very much myself. So I just didn't do a lot of the PvP area. I like the cosmetic rewards, thought that was pretty cool. But other than that, like, I think they should do PvP like Lost Ark. Out of the games I've played, I like Lost Ark's PvP the best. You queue into an arena, standardized builds. Like, I'm going to play this guy, whatever. You can have your own PvP build as opposed to your PvE build. That you can have 3 different people in a row that go elimination style if you want. I absolutely loved the arena style PvP in Lost Ark. And if there was a queuable format where I can sit there in PvE and slaughter through my nightmare dungeons, but then be in queue for a PvP match where it warps me out, I do a PvP and then put right back in or something, maybe some, safety bubble for the warp in and out type thing if you're playing hardcore or something. But I would love that type of system. I don't like the idea of having to go to a certain place in the overworld, sitting there and twiddle my thumbs while I wait for somebody who's hopefully weaker than me to show up with maybe some rewards inside of them. Not a big fan of that. I would rather have a queue-based PvP system. And in that case, I probably would play it if it had kind of its own balance going on as opposed to PvE. I think fundamentally the combat feels good, so I'd probably feel pretty good in PvP. But the way it's implemented now, I'm not really that interested in partaking.
I think that's a fair take. Sure, go.
Yes. So to piggyback on what DM said, I agree with a lot of his points. So to me, the game with the best PvP is WoW. WoW has literally everything. You can go outside and duel people. Now you can Makora people in hardcore. That's even more exciting. I love their battlegrounds. I'll play Warsong Gulch, Arathi Basin, AV, Eye of the Storm, whatever, all day long. I did it all day long for way too many hours. Then they have the arena where you just grind for the gladiator thing. And grinding for gladiator is so rewarding because not only do you get a godly title, but you get a godly mount. Everything that I just described here does not exist in Diablo 4, other than kind of walking outside and dueling. So let's just say something. Let's say you go out there and you kill 5 people, you get the shards, you purify them. When you go to the vendor, I haven't checked it lately. I don't know if they changed it, so I might be misspeaking here. But essentially, everything in the PvP zone was just a recolor of something else that you could get somewhere else in the game. There aren't any like unique awesome things to chase after. Exactly what DM said. I want a queue system with like a battleground. So one thing that I thought was extremely fun, it was killed by pay to win, but super fun, was the Immortal Battleground. I loved PvPing, and they literally ruined it because not only did they make it pay to win, but you could only play 2 hours a day. I can't tell you how many times I sent a message to the Diablo Immortal devs, and I said, if you would just open this up all day long, especially if you would make it not pay to win, and you could grind for like, the Grandmaster, I can't remember, gold on it. What was
Legend.
it called? What Legend? Yes, that. I would just grind that all day long. That would be so much fun. I love PvP. So I think, to me, Diablo 4's current implementation of PvP is essentially a very dressed up, identical copy of Diablo 2 PvP. You step into the zone, you kill each other, and you pick up this material that you purify for essentially nothing, which is essentially equal to picking up an ear. I don't know. I think they need to do a lot more with it, like a queue system and some battlegrounds to make it fun. I'm way less concerned about the balance of it. Like, I'm not so concerned about you fixing the one-shots as I am you didn't implement anything other than a giant dueling arena.
I like the idea of it. I like the rewards as well. Like the WoW PvP balance, well, there's obviously a lot of takes in that, but part of it is the whole rock, paper, scissors style. It's not about everyone being on equal ground. One class counters another kind of balance. That's kind of the balanced aspect of PvP and WoW. And I definitely agree with it. What was really confusing to me was how people were praising PvP in D4 because it was PvP in D2, and then people started praising how PvP was in D2. I was just so confused with why that was praised because I have no fond memories other than, I'm one-shotting people. It was fun for 30 minutes, and that was it.
Yeah, so I like to give my 2 cents on this topic. So I have not really done any PvP in Diablo 4. I've not really done any PvP in Diablo 2. I have done a lot of PvP in WoW, and probably for the same reasons as Rax. I like WoW PvP is just kind of fun, and it has many different modes. It's some of them are fair, some of them are unfair. It's kind of like open world and arenas and all that, right? There's like battlegrounds where it's like basically fair between the teams, but each individual combat is not necessarily fair, right? So there's like a lot of in betweens there, and then there's Diablo 4 PvP where I think okay, there's kind of a reason to go there. You can grind something, and the zone is like somewhat rewarding. So they want to give you like an actual like progression incentive to go there, and do PvP on the fly. And I think that is just not working out as well as they hoped it would, I think, right? So it's just like either people grind there on their own, and if someone comes, they're just gonna leave, or you're just gonna like decimate everyone else and keep grinding or something like that. Or you try to do PvP, but yeah, PvP is just in a really bad spot. Like one thing I liked in PvP in Immortal was that there was an objective and it was fair and it was somewhat balanced as well. There was actual combat. Like I played a lot of Diablo Immortal PvP. I actually grinded to Legend free to play back then, and then I quit. But that was like one of my goals, and I grinded as much Battlegrounds as I could, and I tried to like do this uphill battle, and it actually worked out in the end, and it was fun, even with this somewhat unbalanced pay to win stuff, because the game itself was actually pretty well balanced. Like the classes and the mechanics and the skills you were using, you actually had lots of different builds you could do and lots of different strats to try to like outplay the enemy and actually kind of achieve an advantage, but not to the point where it was just like one shot everyone, like it happens right now in Diablo 4. Like there was actually like a back and forth. You try to hit a stun and then like 2v1 a guy or something like that, or it would like outplay a guy and then like maybe go around the corner, try to do a bandage real quick, come back, and there was like it was actually like a back and forth, versus in Diablo 4 where I think the balance is like so far off, and it's not achievable really in the current state of the game. But the balance is so far off, like everyone is just one-shotting everyone else, and it's just all about this Diablo 2 PvP. And I think this Diablo 2 style, like insta one-shot PvP, is just so niche. Like you may hear people talking about this, and like, oh, please make PvP more of a thing or something. But the way the Diablo 2 PvP works is like such a very niche category of how PvP is enjoyed by people, in my opinion, that it should not be the main, like the baseline PvP in Diablo 4 either. So the only things I can see is that they're adding like more stuff similar to like what Rax described with the arenas and stuff like that, like streamlined PvP, and maybe even like loadouts that are like predetermined, like pre-balanced, like you choose this. I mean that would be an option for sure. Or low level PvP, it's something like a level 30 PvP, I think, where it's like capped with levels or something, and you don't have like all this crazy stuff of uniques and paragons and all this stuff that actually leads to the scenario where you're just one-shotting each other, because then you can actually have like way fewer things to balance, and you can like early game classes are somewhat in a similar spot, I think, overall compared to late game builds. So that might be also another like mode to introduce there.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be another thing that D4 can do to increase retention, enjoyability in general, but also add more content for people to engage with. And PvP is definitely something that a lot of people are interested in doing. I have zero interest, but the things that we talked about here, if they were to introduce even a fraction of that, I'd definitely be trying it out, because that sounds fun to me. That sounds like it's something I would engage with. And I think that there's a lot of perks to be looked at for Blizzard in those scenarios as well. But whether or not that'll happen, we'll see. A couple other things I wanted to check with you guys as well was I don't remember what it was exactly, but maybe you guys can help me out. And I'm talking about pending damage modifiers or pendulum modifiers, where you get X% damage increase for Y seconds and then nothing for C seconds. There was something like that in the patch notes. I don't recall it. I know I put a note on it, but I don't remember what it was. Anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's a new legendary aspect. It's called Aspect of the Elements or something.
Right. Well, wasn't that one? Yeah, it was one of those things, right? And that I just find it so weird that they were to introduce something like that to the game, simply because of the fact that you have this game where you're supposed to kill monsters over and over and over and over again, and just go with the flow and progress. But now you're introducing a situation where this unique, in this example, only gives you the scaling and the damage bonus or the pros of it for a small time frame, and then you have a time frame where you get nothing, and then back to the time frame where you have damage increase. I just don't understand why they would introduce it, because it's always been considered in the industry by the players to be a bad thing. It doesn't feel good to have something that gives you a benefit for a set amount of time that you can't even control, because it's just pending like this, like a pendulum. And then, when you're in the right spot, you'll do good damage. And then when you're in the wrong spot where you might need it, you do nothing. So with this introduction of this, I wanted to hear your takes on it. If you guys think that there is some sort of benefit for this, or if it's just bad all around. We'll start with you, Rex.
Oh, you can go DM if you want, but this is literally the entire core thing of Diablo 3. Believe so. One of the most famous, if not the most famous power in Diablo 3 is Convention of Elements, which is literally they just brought it to Diablo 4, where it cycles through the different elements and you do way more damage when you hit your specific element. And I believe that Legendary was actually designed by the community a long time ago. They did a dev thing where the community designed something, and so I mean, we only have ourselves to blame. The thing about Diablo 3 in the highest level of that game is you fish for the best map, then you walk forward and you pull 100 monsters, and then it's kind of like Street Fighter. You set up a big combo, and then you base it entirely around that COE cycle. So let's just say you have a class that does a lot of damage, but as Woody said, some classes don't have the best resource generation. When the pendulum, when you don't have the damage buff up on Duriel, you would spam your generator to get full resource. And then the second that you're at full and you see it about to tick over, then you pop all your modifiers or whatever, all your skills, and then you dump it all, and you kind of have a rotation to it. I think it's more of like an end game thing. Like you use COE all the time, but for farming, if it's up, it's line, and if it's not, well, you win anyway. But I think it was designed for like an end game play style, and pretty much every single end game build had to play around this. If you were a casual and you just didn't play around COE, you couldn't get anywhere near the clears of the top players. You would just be 5, 10 GR tiers down if you could just never figure it out. So I'm not arguing whether that's a good system or not, but that's how it was used for pretty much Diablo 3's entire lifespan.
They're bringing COE to D4. Did I miss this? I'm looking at the new unique list. I'm trying to find. I didn't realize they were bringing the same mechanic.
Control F for elements. Control F for elements.
Okay, so yeah, I think that Rex makes some good points. One thing there though is, number one, Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 are fundamentally very different games in terms of like pacing and difficulty, and like you don't pull like 100 monsters and then line up everything. I mean, there may definitely be builds that might do something more in that direction, especially when we have hard content, especially when we have leaderboards. But right now, that's not a thing. Right now, you wouldn't stop your DPS phase and then just do something like that. There are like some niche cases, maybe if you stagger the boss and then you line everything up or so, okay. But outside of that, I don't really see a lot of builds doing something like this. And the other thing is that in Diablo 3, there is no way to make a multi-skill build. Like even in Diablo 4, we barely do that, but there is at least potential. And in Diablo 3, this is just not a thing. You cannot have a build that has multiple skills that actually do something. You have one main skill, and this is doing everything. And in Diablo 4, we have a much better balanced game. You actually have the option. You even have certain mechanics that kind of like, push you in that direction, like Nature's Fury or, these kind of things, where you can maybe combine two separate skills. And, like you trigger this one, or, you use this one in that moment and then the other one in that moment, or, this one might have a cooldown and this one doesn't, or, something like that. And there is actually a realistic potential to introduce builds that actually use multiple skills in Diablo 4. And I think in that case, something like the elements aspect is actually a very valuable addition. The problem is just that it's like absolutely horrendously bad, because for whatever reason they made it additive, like even called out.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to say, this doesn't look like it's that big of a deal. I mean, it cycles between 2 and stuff. What was it, the 4 from COE, if I remember right? So you're going to be, it's not 50% timer, but it's additive. So I don't really.
Yeah, it's
completely
useless.
Actually going to use it?
Yeah, it's completely useless. So forget about this thing. But if it was multiplicative, it would actually be, I think this might actually just be a mistake, honestly. But maybe they kind of like introduced it additive as like a quote unquote mistake, so that no one is like kind of forced to use it, but they want to see reactions, and then they might later on, bug fix it to be multiplicative, to be an actual aspect.
Blizzard doesn't make mistakes, Woody.
Yeah, okay. It's just the math, I guess. Yeah. So either way, yeah, the point is, right now, no one has to worry about this aspect because it's literally not an aspect, right? This is like 3 lines of text that do literally nothing. And at some point, it's going to become a multiplicative aspect, and then it's actually something like an edge masters or something like a accelerating aspect or something like that. And then it's actually somewhere on a level of like where an aspect needs to be, and it could potentially open up some potential for these kind of double skill builds. And for that, I think there is room in Diablo.
I definitely agree with it to some degree. But it's like I've never just been a big fan at all with pending buffs. It's just been very annoying and more of a nuisance than an interesting mechanic to play around. That's my genuine take on it.
Yeah, okay. Like maybe to like elaborate a little bit more. It's like obviously they have to make sure that this is not the one thing that every single build uses just because it gives you the most overall DPS, right? So if there's like the same thing as conventional elements in Diablo 3, then this is a fail. Like the only purpose this legendary aspect can have is to give you like the opportunity to use double element skills, right? And you have like one skill like this, one skill like that, and you kind of do a combo, like a chain lightning and frozen orb or whatever, right? So you have like the single target thing, you have the AoE thing, and you even can combine both a little bit with this aspect or something like that. If that is a thing and that actually becomes a build, then I think this is a success. But if this becomes this convention of elements where every single build has to run this just because, then this is obviously a fail. But Diablo 4's balance is way better, and in Diablo 3 there was just no alternative. You had like 3 rings in the game that did something, and this was one of the 2 you're wearing. So there was no option to not run this thing, basically, and almost every single build. So that was a much bigger problem.
Do we know if the math adds up where it because I'm just looking at this for the first time, it's giving additive bonuses to these damage types. So let's say you're wearing this on a Sorcerer, right? Does that then go into the Paragon node where you have the bonus damages and you get 3%, and then that becomes multiplicative through the Paragon node that way? Or you think this is going to be just additive on top of it? Like, you think it calculates before so you still get that bonus? That'd be what I'd be curious about.
It might be just like basically fire, lightning, etc. There's like a category of that, but we don't know. So realistically, it's just completely pointless no matter what.
Yeah,
that's the name of the game.
Hopium for the ring.
Name of the game when it comes to calculations in the games. Like, it's impossible for us to verify. They said minions get 30% of your attack speed inherited, but it turns out after double checking this multiple times over that it's 30% off 30%. So like calculations in the game is just good luck finding out anything. Another question which kind of weaves into the idea of aspirational content would be, do you guys think that we're going to, in the near future, because I think it will happen eventually, but in the near future, see them adding new world tiers, either in the form of, hey, we're going to have another tier 5 for harder content generally, or maybe have a tier 5 in the form of, hey, this is where you engage the absolute pinnacle endgame level 100 content. What do you guys think about that? Start with whoever wants to start. Sorry.
Can we have a data mine like way back at the start of the game that show the world tier 5 plus a bonus gem level as well? And I thought in one of the live streams someone slipped up and said world tier 5, I mean world tier 4. Not that that's proof or anything. But the data mine was the closest we had seen. And we had images and stuff of those gems, if I remember correctly.
I think so, yeah.
Exactly what I was going to say. I mean, of course it's coming. Maybe it's part of an expansion. Maybe it'll be in season 3. I mean, definitely coming, probably coming soon. It's not... Up until season 2, the main problem was the endgame content, but part of endgame content is endgame progression, which was like non-existent. They kind of changed that now. The base and the max eye level scales as you level up and you go to 925. Now you can target farm, get the uber uniques. That's certainly a step in the right direction, but that's not what people are expecting from Diablo 4. We're expecting a full-fledged crafting system. We're expecting something of a much larger magnitude. The expectations for any AAA game are very high, but this is, I think there are some even higher expectations for Diablo. This is the franchise that started it all. So they got to implement it soon, and they have to keep doubling down on this endgame stuff, and they have to do it quickly. I think that this season 2 is just a stepping stone. They need to do it, and they need to do it quickly, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with that. Like some of the parts that I think about when it comes to new world tiers is the my experience with D3 was that I played the Witch Doctor till about a decade ago when I got roped into playing PoE. This was just before Reaper of Souls, and then I came back for Diablo 3 with the one of the last season or whatever it was, with a skill tree thingy. And one of the things that just felt so daunting to me was when I started playing it, there were 16 different difficulties, and it was all the same except it was a little harder. So I hope I know we're all in the boat of expecting them to introduce new world tiers. I just hope that they're gonna make it like in a way that there's not too many world tiers. I don't want to do everything one more time, do another capstone, get another one 16 times. I would rather see them having the 4 world tiers and then open up the possibility of, I don't know, Nightmare Dungeon tier 100, or you have to kill Uber Lilith or something crazy to go into like the super aspirational high end crazy, where it's like, this is gonna be extremely hard. This is like the pinnacle difficulty content, and that would be the highest tier that you can get to. Sort of like what you were talking about, DM, before, with like stretch goals. Like, I can do this. When I've done that, that will open up the hardest things in the game. I would rather see the world tiers be based around that, where you're expected to engage with endgame mechanics in like the second highest tier, and the highest would only be like, you're gonna have to have your character fleshed out to be able to handle this type of content. I would rather see that than looking at multiple tiers of the world just being the same thing over and over again. It's just a little hard, a little bit more experience, a little bit more loot, because that doesn't feel like appealing to me. I'd rather see it be gated behind some difficulty.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think one thing that Diablo 3 did horribly in RS was the difficulty system. It's just like way too many difficulties, and they're kind of like very granular, and it's all the same. It's just like, why, right? And at least in Diablo 4, I think they did a pretty good job of like actually making you feel like you enter in the next step, right? The monsters become faster and more accurate, and more aggressive, and you can actually feel that, right? You can feel the elites doing more affixes, and they target you and all that stuff. And that is really cool design, I think, in Diablo 4. And going forward, I mean, first of all, I don't expect a World Tier 5 anytime soon. And maybe that's going to be an expansion thing. But I think right now what we saw in the Beta 9, this is probably like some, kind of like they leave the door open to maybe do that at some point or something. But right now, I think that the game is kind of like just like trying to settle in. And we're going to have this game now. And, there's going to be like this new endgame system that goes like probably beyond tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, but it doesn't necessarily need like a new world tier. I think the main advantage of adding a new world tier is that you can actually give people that special reward and like a higher difficulty floor, basically, right? Like, what if you go to world tier 5 and all monsters there are like at least level 125 or something like that, right? So even like if you do whispers, it's actually like somewhat challenging, and it's not like you just like obliterate everything, or the same with world bosses, the same with anything, right? And you can just kind of like do like a much higher like baseline that is like a noticeable jump from the highest of World Tier 4, and then give people some special reward. Rax talked about a crafting system, but why not offer people some special crafting material that we can actually use, to like min-max our items later on? Why can't we like just get like something like a corruption system? Like you have a chance to destroy your items or make them better, something like that. Like if you're like that far progress already in the game, then this would be like a perfect scenario to actually introduce something like that, because you probably have like 7 copies of everything you want. So, why not have some fun with that? So there's like some options there, but I don't really see that coming anytime soon, to be honest.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
Nightmare Dungeon is 150, Nightmare Dungeon is tier 200. Like, give us aspirational, make it crazy. Like, I think that would be a cool way to do it. What were you saying, Rex?
So if I think about all the games, I would say the difficulty system in Diablo 4 and Diablo 3 is probably my least favorite of any of the systems. So World of Warcraft, you want to know how, like, at least in the beginning, how they make Classic WoW harder? It just gets harder. You just play the game, and it just gets harder. PoE, same thing. You've got the 16 levels of maps, but I don't have to go to a fountain and pick something and lock myself into finding only this specific loot. It just gets harder as you go farther. Lost Ark, they require you to get your gear to a certain level, and then you can try the harder content, and you're just constantly playing, you're upgrading, you're honing yourself up, and then you just go to the next level. There is no picking anything. Like the only thing that you pick is like in Last Epoch and in Lost Ark, you would pick like you can pick like the harder versions of the bosses if you clear the easy ones. I think that's a good system. And maybe in PoE you can start farming for the uber bosses once you kill the regular versions of the bosses. But this whole idea of like gating how everything happens and switching it at a statue and then switching it again, I personally don't really like that at all. If they just abolish the whole difficulty system and at a certain point, sacred items just became a thing that could drop, and then later ancestrals and I don't know what they would do. The interesting thing that they have about it is they have like different XP values. You could just scale the XP of the monsters higher and keep the cap or something. There's some math manipulation you could do there to maybe pseudo build the same thing into the game without actually literally selecting it at a fountain. But kind of like Woody said, he doesn't really like the difficulty thing. That would not have been the system that I would have went forward with Diablo 4.
I definitely think that's a fair take on it. What's your take, DM, on the world tier topic?
I don't feel like world tiers are going to solve any of the issues. I feel like world tiers basically just give us like a new game plus, you know. I don't really find that exciting. It's the same minions in the same overworld doing the same things. They're just higher level now. Like your point about D3 having Torment 16, I'm 15 and 16. I mean, don't increase my enjoyment of the game if I'm in 15 or if I'm in 16. I think what really matters is when you get to level 100, what does that replay cycle look like? So having one additional tier might be kind of nice for like the 80 to 100 portion. Because by the time you're like 80 or something, you're in world tier 4, you're farming away, you're doing fine, okay? But maybe what they'll do is they'll stretch on and make getting all the way to 100 a little bit less boring. So maybe one more tier. Sure, I'm not going to be mad at them if they implement it. It's not a big deal. But is that a solution for in-game content? No. It's not content. It's a way to have something until you get to where the repetitive content cycle is. And really what matters is, and I think they fundamentally understand this because that's why what they're trying to do, at least in season 2, is adding these different repetitive cycles elsewhere out of the game. They're pulling us out of the nightmare dungeons. They're having us farm other parts of the game, and or they unlock bosses, and then you take and you get the parts. You can trade with people. They're trying to get us out of repeating the same thing over and over and over again, and into a little bit more mixed variety of in-game content. So I can see that they recognize that as well. I don't think they think world tiers is going to be the solution to content. I don't think it's the solution to content. One more tier might be all right to drag out to get to 100, but beyond that point, it doesn't fundamentally change the game any.
That's fair. That's basically what I was saying. Like, if they, I think that we are going to get world tiers difficulty soon, and I think that when they do, that it should be gated at the point where it's an aspirational thing rather than you're supposed to do this to get to the repetitive content. Because if they do it that way, then it doesn't move that approach. Like you said, farming 15 or 16, I mean, it's not going to change the way you enjoy the game. But if they add so that the world tier 5, for example, would then be the super hard, every monster is 125 levels, and that's the uber versions of all the bosses. You get uber beast in the eyes, you get uber Varshan if you do it in that world tier instead. That would make sense to me, because then it's suddenly an aspirational, long-term stretch goal kind of approach, rather than, well, you're supposed to go through all the world tiers. Now that you're in the highest, now you're going to do the end game repetitive content. Just to separate it from that cycle of content, if you will.
Well, the thing is, does it fundamentally change the game or not? It really comes down to what you offer in that new world tier. So, it can change the game if you want. They introduce champion monsters in world tier 3, and, they introduce sacred items, they introduce ancestral items, and they have completely different stats that actually transform some builds, like resource generation and, the higher cooldown values, and you can actually feel the impact of these kind of things. If there was like a world tier 5 where they actually offer a certain new type of enemy, for example, or a new type of gear or new type of stats or crafting materials or anything, then it would actually expand the game in some sense. Not necessarily transform everything, but there would be like a reason to go there at some point as kind of the final stretch and the final, okay, I've made it this far, I'm level 100 now, and now I can start farming there comfortably, and everything is a bit harder for experienced players, and it can actually purposely also make it more difficult than the typical game, right? Because you can say, okay, like we expect the typical player to end up somewhere between like level 70 and 100 or whatever, depending on how far they go. And then for like the actual like more engaged crowd, there's like this world tier 5 now. And this is where you can actually put a lot of stuff, and you can actually make it way harder, and not necessarily aspirational, but there could be like super elites that they have like 7 elite affixes and 10 times the HP, and they can like randomly pop up like a butcher or something, like very rarely, for example. And they actually have like these moments where suddenly there is actually a change in the gameplay, and maybe they give you like a nice reward, not just like 7 like not a 5 legendary items, but an actual reward they can't get in world tier 4. So like imagine these guys drop a million heart or whatever. So there would be ways to make that more exciting, I think.
I definitely agree, and also to weave back to what you were saying, Rax, with Lost Ark having the requirement that you need to reach a certain level of gear to be able to progress to the next stage. I mean, Diablo 4 kind of has that. You have to beat a capstone dungeon before you're able to go to the next. And if you go into the capstone and you realize, shit, I am so badly geared, or my character's not ready for this, that's a pretty good hint to tell you that maybe you should stick to the world tier you're in, progress your character a couple more levels, maybe a little bit of gear, or just get good, get your food buff before you go into the capstone dungeon. Get that sorted and then progress it before you unlock the next stage. So it kind of has that, but then again, I mean, I guess some people, I don't think majority, but a lot of people would get carried through it, have their friends run with it, or maybe you do it in a party, and then you realize, well, when I'm playing solo, I'm not good enough. But all of these indicators would then tell you that you should go back to the previous world tier to grind out whatever you need, more levels, more glyph levels from world tier 3 and NMDs, or just gear upgrades before you're able to handle the next tier, right? So I guess it kind of has that already. I know we're just over 3-hour mark. I don't want to keep you all day as well, so unless you guys have any other topics to cover. I did want to talk a little bit about cal level, because I was so surprised that we haven't found it yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it's not in the game, because it would have been found by now. I'm very disappointed that it's not in the game. I think this is pretty clear that we're going to get it at some point, but I was very disappointed that it's not in the game. But I want to hear you guys' thoughts on it, especially from Urax and Woody, who's been playing so much with Diablo, Diablo 3, and all those things where you have like the unicorn level and all those things. So we can start with you, Woody. What's your take on the cow level topic, like just in and out?
Well, I think you just have to look harder. No, but for real, I mean, it may be in the game, it may be not. Maybe it's partially implemented. Who knows? Realistically, I think it would be cool to have something like that, as a gimmick. But this is like absolutely not their focus right now. So they can do this, when the sun is shining, right? And not right now. So if they ever make it, I would hope to not engage with it too much, like randomly, and also not really being like too much encouraged to do it. It could be something like very, very special, something very niche, something like a huge RNG drop, and then you can open the car level and you get something or so. I don't want to have like a random rift that I open like 3 times a day that is like a cow level, like that is like too much. But who knows? Maybe they can do like a cool like special implementation of it, and it's like nice, but not like a thing that you farm like all day or something.
Yeah, so I'll go kind of like the opposite of what Woody said. It depends on the implementation, but every Diablo game, except for Diablo 1, has 2 things. They have the cow level, and they have Diablo. We don't have either of those things in Diablo 4. So we're missing the 2 core pieces of the game. People love the cow level no matter what. The cow level implementation in Diablo 2 was godly. The cow level in Diablo 3 is terrible and worthless. It's just like anything else with design. They could make it whatever they want to make it. They could make it, like Woody said, like a side thing or a special thing. They could also, like, I don't know, once you do figure out the crazy thing to unlock the cow level, maybe you have a 1 in 100 chance of plugging a nightmare dungeon. You have your affixes. Okay, you're going to go to Mercy's Reach. You walk in, surprise, it's the cow level. And I don't know, You could make whatever kind of crazy fun stuff happen you want in there. Like, oh my god, I finally did it. I opened a nightmare dungeon and it's the cow level, and the final boss is the Uber Cow King or the Cow Queen or the whole cow family. You could do there's a million fun and awesome things that you could do there. And one like recurring thing, I've chatted with DM a lot about this about the last couple of weeks, and DM always says at the end of the day, it's all about fun. He's going to play the game if it's fun, and he's not going to play it if it's not fun. It just all boils down to that. The cow level is kind of like, it's an easy one. It's like it's a low hanging fruit. It's a softball. Implement it into the game, make it fun, make it rewarding, and I think you're actually going to get something out of that. I think you're going to gain some favor and boost the morale of the community. I don't know why they haven't done it yet. I think it would be a big value add.
I think so as well. And like a lot of it comes down to like just the desire to have one, because like I said, everybody loves it. That's why I'm so disappointed that we haven't found it yet, according to Woody. You know. What's your take, DM?
It's out there, man.
I was surprised it wasn't
everywhere.
in the game. Like I was pretty surprised it wasn't in the game because we had so many hints around it. I thought,
Yeah.
okay, so they have a hard to find cow level as a marketing plan. Because I looked at Diablo 4 and it's like they market everything. This is one of the most marketed games in the history of games, right? So I'm thinking cow level is going to be like a detective search for the cow level thing. People were already writing articles and making videos about it. I was like, okay, it's they're doing like a hard to find cow level, and then they'll secretly like flip a switch in which someone can find it, then they'll find it, and it's all like a marketing play or something, right? But then it's just like straight up not in the game. But then we have all these hints about it. So kind of weird, to be honest. But I mean, to Rax's point, we don't have Diablo in the game either. So, you know, it's
Maybe
it
they
is
just
what it
haven't
is.
found it either. Yeah. Maybe he's
Maybe
there.
they haven't found. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is a marketing play, but it's the longest con of all time. Someone's finally gonna pull up and find the cow level, and everyone's coming back. That's it. That's my copium.
Well,
Everyone's coming back.
Diablo 1's cow level, wasn't that like the fence or something? You had to like find the right gap or whatever it was.
I think
I
I
think
think
that
the
was the
lore
one.
here is there wasn't a cow level in Diablo 1, but everyone said that there was, which is why they put a cow level in Diablo 2.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how it went. There was only like some kind of dead cow or something or whatever. There was like a prop, I think, somewhere in Diablo 1, and that kind of caused this whole thing, as far as I remember.
Yeah, so that's why the meme is I guess the zone is the Moo farm, but the meme is there is no cow level because there wasn't a cow level in Diablo 1.
Cake is a lie.
Because I was pretty sure you could get into where the cows are. Because if I recall correctly, you could just, you know, spam the cow and you would have a bunch of dialogues coming up. And I was, you know, nostalgic. But I was pretty sure you could enter where the cows are, like behind the fence at some point. But like there was no cows to kill, so to say. That wasn't the case, if I recall correctly. But then Diablo 2, like you said, the implementation of it was phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. And everybody does. And, you know, people thought Diablo 3 was fun, but the introduction of it was kind of so-so. So I really hope they do something about it with Diablo 4 at some point. Because it's like you said, DM, as well, there's so many hints about it all over the place.
There's a lot of hints, yeah.
Yeah, there's still nothing.
There's no chance. There's no chance that by the end of Diablo 4's development that we won't have the cow level and Diablo. You can bet the farm on it. We'll get both of those things. Just a matter of when. They're coming for sure. They're in one of the towns. There's a cow like shrine.
Yep.
There's 4 cows like looking at each other. It's
at the fountain, right?
Yeah,
it's coming
for sure. Like I said before, I didn't want to go too far above 3 hours as a max cap. Do you guys have any other topics you guys want to bring up? All right.
No.
Fair enough. All right. So without wasting everybody's time, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this up and thank everybody for coming. Appreciate you guys. For those of you watching it on stream or on YouTube later, you can find DarthMicrotransaction. All the links will be in the descriptions below. Same thing with Rax and wudijo. So thanks so much, all 3 of you joining. Hope you guys had fun. And yeah, good luck on the season 2 launch. I'll see you in the Twitch directory.
Thanks for the invite, buddy.
later, guys.
Yeah, it was very fun. Thank you very much. Good luck.